Welcome to the Jeffrey of Leon podcast, episode 12. Today's conversation is with Wyatt Chabeniuk, a 25-year-old Canadian working in menswear with a special interest in psychology, philosophy, and religion. In today's conversation, Wyatt shares his personal story, and we touch on some pretty heavy subjects, including the problem of bullying, something that many people all over the world are struggling with on a regular basis. And we also discuss how Wyatt deals with being highly agreeable and how he managed to overcome that. And we also bring forward some effective communication techniques that can be used for social confrontation. And finally, we delve into the current state of mythological narratives in the modern world. Thank you for listening. If you enjoy the Jeffrey van Leeuwen podcast, please consider subscribing or following the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and YouTube. Leaving a comment or a positive review is also a great way to help out. And with all of that out of the way, let's get started. It's my great pleasure to introduce Wyatt Chabeniuk. Hi, Wyatt. Good to finally talk to you.
Good to talk to you too, Jeffrey.
Let's just start with a general introduction and see where the conversation leads us from there. How does that sound?
That sounds great. Yeah, so
Awesome. You want to start?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll jump in and kind of introduce myself here, kind of brief. I know when Peterson Academy first launched, I made a little, not so little. When I say little, I mean long, kind of little introductory post kind of explaining my story a little bit. But to kind of reiterate on that, I'm just 25 years old, Canadian boy, highest education being kind of like high school level. And then after high school, I started working kind of in the menswear industry, which I am still working in. So that's been about for the past 8, almost 9 years now. And philosophy, psychology, religion, it's always been a deep interest of mine. I mean, you can see the bookshelf behind me.
It's quite a full bookcase.
It's just always something that's gripped me, like even in high school, because I myself, I wasn't as attentive as I should be, and I often kick myself in the side for that. But, in the grand scheme of things, there's a reason everything happens and a reason things unfold. So I need to have a little more, not that I need to have more faith in that, but to have faith in that direction of where things are taking me. But so I didn't really pay attention too much in schools, and I kind of, because I'm very agreeable by temperament, I took a lot of the easier courses that I knew were below my ability, just so I could get a higher grade. Because when my parents would see a higher grade, it's like, hey, good job. But if you see a lower grade in a really hard course, and it's like, oh, bad grade, right? Not that I'm like trying a harder thing, right? And it's completely wrong of me to think that way, because that was kind of, to quote Marcus Aurelius, you suffer in imagination more than you do in reality. It was just this imaginary situation that I was trying to avoid the conflict of. But what really interested me in high school was the psychology classes I took. I think I ended up getting in like grade 11 psychology, I got a 98, and in grade 12, I got 99, or vice versa. But it was always something that interested me. So when I stopped in school, I was kind of always exploring that on the side. But before high school, keeping the story a little out of track here, but like from kindergarten to about grade 9, I was always bullied. And when it came grade 9 to grade 10, I ended up going to a different high school than kind of most of the peers. So I kind of had this opportunity to really reinvent myself. And the first thing I was doing, because at the time I was watching lots of videos on YouTube from like men's style channels and whatnot, I was like, I'll just reinvent my image, because I also wanted to be a little bit better at school. And I had heard from these videos that there's been studies done that the better you dress, the better you perform. And so there was that aspect to it. And then there was the other aspect of, well, maybe people don't care about me and bully me because I don't care about myself. So I'm going to start dressing better as a way to care about myself.
Mm-hmm.
So then when I got into high school, I kind of first started just wearing nicer kind of like button up casual, button down shirts and like kind of chino casual pants. And then it went to adding like a bow tie on top of that. And I became like known as the bow tie guy in high school. And then I started wearing sport coats. And then from there, I started wearing suits because I would just mow lawns kind of during the summertime in between schools. And then the money from that, I'd either go to like a thrift store or a local kind of menswear store around me. They would have these like buy one suit, get like one free for $150, which is like pretty good. Considering they were like probably regular price, like $400 to $600 suits. So like I don't know how they were able to do that promotion, but I'm not complaining. So it kind of would progress throughout high school. And I noticed that the more interest I kind of took into myself and the more I did my own thing, keep in mind, I was like one of the only guys wearing suits in school and high school, mind you. So you're already kind of sticking out.
Mm-hmm.
But the more I did that, surprisingly enough, what I thought was going to happen of, being bullied more because I'm standing out more, I'm being more of an individual, I actually got more respect. Like it was so weird. Like people really took to that. And I had lots of guys telling me that like, you kind of inspire me because, I wish I could, start dressing better. Or a lot of the more common sentiment was you're bold enough to kind of just do what you want without caring what other people think. And I wish I was kind of more like that. And I remember when it really hit me was in my grade 12 kind of marketing and management course that I took. There was this guy, because I'm very like straight-laced, goody two-shoes, hyper conscientious, very quiet, kind of just do my own thing. There was this kid who was kind of quite the opposite of that, who was very, outgoing. I think he was at the time, he's an aspiring kind of like rapper. So he's kind of more that, street, kind of that high school kind of rebellion, drugs, or not drugs. I shouldn't say that because I don't know that about him, but alcohol, that kind of like, the type, I'm sure, because we've all been through high school that you have those little cliques. And what most surprised me out of all the people in the room, he spoke up and said kind of very much that same sentiment that it's like, it's great. Like, I love seeing that you have so much passion and courage to just be who you are and not be afraid of what kind of anyone else thinks. And I was like, that really shocked me because I'm like, here's a kid that, I would have never expected to receive praise from, right? Because he was more that kind of raw street gangster. I use parentheses around that because it's not really, but just to paint the picture, right? To have that kind of praise for something like, dressing up, wearing suits and trying to be more professional, so to speak. So that was really interesting. And then, so I didn't really know what I wanted to do in high school in terms of a career, because I had this deep love for psychology from the courses I took, but I never had the personal kind of faith or belief in myself that I could be like an academic type, because I never really thought of myself as being particularly smart or intelligent. So I'm like, well, what do? I know I have a passion for psychology. I was bullied a bunch as a kid, and I started wearing clothes and I wasn't bullied anymore. And it completely transformed my life when I started taking care of my appearance, because all my peers started treating me better. I was being more respected. I was doing better. I was becoming more confident. I was talking to more people. I was really changing as a person. And I tied a lot of that kind of personal development and that transformation to clothing. So I was like, in that marketing and management class, we had to do like a 1 year, 5 year, 10-year plan. And I was just sitting there beside myself. So I needed something, because it was kind of like, you start like 10, 15 minutes to write this at the start of the class. And then everyone would go around and say what they wrote. And I was like, it's getting time to say, and I don't have anything. So I wrote down this plan of like, oh, well, I'll go into menswear. And I kind of developed this kind of plan of like, getting the experience I needed with part-time work and then going to the, highest end luxury, most renowned menswear business in town, and just building a career there under the assumption like, well, this business has been around 50, 60. I think just actually recently they had their 70th year anniversary. Obviously people can make a living there because you don't have an enterprise last that long if people can't work, if they can't support themselves. So I'm like, it seems reasonable enough to go into that. And then that way, at least, well, I'm not a psychologist per se, and I can't help people, directly kind of impact them in that way of, kind of developing and integrating their character. I can at least help them integrate how, they dress, because I've seen the powerful effects that has had on me personally. So why not try to share what I found and what I seem to have a knack for with other people? So then kind of out of high school, well, actually, before I even graduated high school, I was talking with the company because I went to some like lower end chains in town to try to just get the experience so I could go to the more prestigious corporation. And they all rejected me like, oh, you'll never get work without experience. I don't know what you're thinking, da, 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 da. Even though one guy even said, he verbatim told me, and this was crushing at the time, that I like everything about you. You're great. I wish my sons were more like you, but because you do not have any prior experience, I cannot hire you. Or not that I cannot, I will not hire you. And I was just kind of beside me, like, you're telling me I'm the perfect candidate, but you're not going to hire me for an arbitrary reason that I just don't have experience. And so that like really crushed me. I think I went home on the bus just in tears after that. But then so I was like, okay, well, the lower places won't take me because I don't have experience. The only place I haven't tried applying to is the place I'm trying to go for. Why not just apply there, see what happens? So I do that. And it was actually kind of a little more unorthodox. Instead of trying to get the managers to interview me, I actually interviewed the managers. I sought out interviews with them. And then by the time that period was ended, the general manager at the time actually offered me a full-time position. But the problem was I was still in school. I had 2 months left and I needed to write my finals. And I'm like, well, I can't just drop out now because I might need the high school diploma later. So I had to turn that down. I graduated, and then the position had closed up and there was no further work at the time. So I just kind of bided my time. And then from when school ended in probably about, what would it be, like June or July? That's usually probably about June. For the next months, every month I would go back in, like probably bi-weekly, just checking in with the managers, like, hey, is there a position open? Hey, is there a position open? And then eventually when it came to November, they got tired of me coming back and bothering them all the time. So they gave me a position, but then I ended up working with them for about, like I said, about 7 years before I moved to the local family business that I now work with. But, so I was just like, oh, wow, that's kind of unexpected that, here I was thinking, one business is telling me I need experience in order to work. And now the highest level business you could possibly imagine in the entire country is like, yeah, sure. We'll hire you.
Over.
And so, and just throughout working there, I've learned a lot, especially in the terms of, just myself, especially alongside all the stuff I've been reading and applying that and developing myself further. And it wasn't really until COVID where one of the managers actually took a really serious interest in me and started mentoring me. And then from there, like everything just kind of changed. I started learning more about, leadership and kind of applying those and really kind of making a name for myself there. And it was just like incredible. Eventually the position I was working in, that made me end up leaving was because of the hours. It didn't really work out. And that's why I went to the more local business. Cause as we were kind of talking before this, I like getting up early. and I like going to bed like latest 9 o'clock. And when your shift ends at 9:30 and your bedtime is 9 o'clock, there's just an irreconcilable problem there, right? So, and you were mandated to work X amount of evening shifts, which just didn't work for me. Whereas the company that had reached out to me, they work until 5:30. And I'm like, oh, well, this is perfect, because I've been trying to ask you guys to see if I could just work till like 6 o'clock. So it just kind of made sense from there. So that's kind of a little bit about me. And now I've kind of Peterson Academy coming, and all that I've kind of studied and learned, I'm like, and especially with my girlfriend, like when I met my girlfriend, that was major. She's like, you're actually pretty smart. You should try to pursue all this stuff you read for real. And I'm like, maybe I should. And I had actually tried, because I did apply to go to university maybe 2 years ago, and I got accepted after I kind of upgraded a lot of my high school courses that I took the lower end classes of during actual high school, because we have like a little college that offers these high school upgrading courses in town. And I ended up passing those like with probably like what would virtually be like a 4.0 GPA, because they were like mid 90s averages for the class at the end. And it was like biology, math, English, all these things. And I was like, oh, maybe there is something here. Maybe she's right, as she often is. And then when I moved across a few provinces, because I'm in Canada, to go to this university. And when I got Christmas Day, so the classes I was going to take for psychology started in the new year. On Christmas Day, I got an email from them informing me that they were all online, teach yourself at your own pace. And it was like $4,000 for the tuition. And I'm like, I've been teaching myself for the past like 8 years without paying $4,000. I don't really see, because a lot of the reason I wanted to go to university was the social kind of communal, like to integrate into that ecosystem virtually, right? And, the classroom dynamic with the professors and with the students. And it's like, well, if I'm just going to be studying at home at a distance, teaching myself, I know Peterson is planning to launch his online academy. Why not just wait for that to come out? I'll save like a whole portion of the cost, and I'll still learn a whole bunch. And hopefully if it gets accredited, then that takes care of that side of things as well. And maybe eventually in like 5-10 years, I'll actually be able to, hopefully through Peterson, be able to start working in what genuinely interests me and drives me. So yeah.
I think it's also what interests you more. If you are just interested in the studying aspect of it, so gaining the knowledge to do something with, whether it's a profession or a hobby, then spending a huge amount of money might not be worth it. I think indeed the reason why it's very attractive to go to university is because of what you said, the social aspect. You meet your friends over there. You meet your your future business partners over there. You meet people that have the same interests with you, so that can provide you with something later on, or you can provide them with something later on. You might even meet your partner over there who, so I think that's generally speaking why it's very attractive. But like you said, if it's just about the knowledge, you can come very far with a couple of online lectures and a couple of books that can do wonders.
And an open mind too, like, because what you learn, regardless of if it's accredited or not, like if you learn it and you know it and you apply it and you have merit to it, you're going to get results, right? Because what always interested me the most when I was working in that corporation was actually the more kind of like leadership side of things. And well, like judging by some of your posts, it sounds like you're in a leadership position yourself. And I'm sure you can attest that psychology actually plays a pretty important factor, because you're dealing with people, right? Even in terms of retail, like a lot of it is psychological work, so to speak, not like therapy, but you have to know people and how to interact and what people respond to and this kind of thing. So it's very applicable in those senses. And I always found myself taking more towards like the things I loved doing the most when I was working there was, bringing on new staff, teaching them, because I always worked the entry level roles, but I was like probably the best person at all those roles because I was the only one. Because if your competition is a bunch of, college students or people who are just working it to get money to sustain them through college versus someone who's there because that's what they eventually want their career to be, you're just going to outcompete them naturally because you're more invested than they are. So it's not really like I'm good or anything, but it's just, I've developed and I have a genuine interest in being the best I can be here. And so hopefully, if not else for this, to at least just learn those more kind of humanities skills, so to speak, I guess, of, interpersonal relationships and that stuff that I could transfer into a leadership environment. That'd be great. But big goal and the big dream would be if Peterson, like being a psychologist himself, and he's expressed his doubt for the current way, the current like psychological code of conduct, because there's a lot of corruption there, then maybe he starts unofficially teaching his own like life coaches or something like that. Who knows? But
well, going back to your timeline, thanks for laying it out, by the way, from start to finish. It's very useful. So if it's okay with you, I once again would like to bring you back to the beginning and to delve a little bit deeper on certain aspects of your story.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And a lot of why I kind of laid that out was to kind of give you different threads to kind of pull off of to go where
you gave me more than enough.
Want to go in my not so short introduction.
Yeah, for sure. Before I continue though, just to double check, are you okay with me bringing up the subject of bullying? Because I know that is a very sensitive subject.
No, absolutely.
To many people.
I'm of the opinion that I am who I am today because that happened to me. So I embrace and I accept it. Like, obviously it's unpleasant to go through, but if you look at the big picture, it was actually a good thing that happened to me. I very literally would not be in this chair talking to you today if that did not happen to me. It's part of my story. It's part of what made me who I am. So fully open to that.
It's very good that you are approaching it like that. I know for a lot of people it's a very sensitive and painful subject to bring forward to. So it's good to double check if people are okay with discussing it, because bullying is, to me, one of the most toxic things that a human can experience, and it feels to me to be of all times. So even though there are programs to protect against bullying or attack the idea of bullying, it seems to seep to trickle on forward to the next generations regardless. And everybody in whatever generation has a story, it feels to me, about bullying. So if I got your story right, before switching schools, and let's discuss it a little bit later because I'm very curious where that switch came from. But before you switched schools, you were on another school until grade 9, and that's the period where you encountered bullying towards you.
Well, yeah. So to clarify here, Jeffrey, so in Canada it goes elementary school is like kindergarten to grade 6, junior high is grade 7 to grade 9. And then high school is grade 10 to grade 12. So from virtually kindergarten all the way till grade 9, pretty much every single year I experienced bullying.
And then you're like 12 years old, right? Grade 9.
How old would I be in grade 9? I really don't know. I often forget how old I am. I'm not good with ages or anything like that, but that probably sounds about par for the course. Because I graduated high school in 2016. So that was, but I was probably 17 then. So 3 years before that, I would be like, what, 14?
Right, okay.
Early
like
teenagers,
okay.
Something like that.
Okay,
approximately.
Gotcha. So what did you experience? So a couple of questions here. what do you experience? Did you experience? Do you have a couple of examples of that? And why do you think you were the focus of bullying?
Great questions, actually. So I do have a few instances, but what I will answer to first is the second question, which I think a lot of the reason why I experience bullying is I'm always kind of the weird kid. I mean, I don't know if you've read any of my posts on Peterson Academy, but I go off on all these kind of wild things. So it's more like kind of like that ugly duckling thing, like the black sheep. Like I just was different. And I think that because usually when kids bully when they're younger, it's because something about someone else is different than the group. And I think I was just very much that way. Like, for example, when I was in like elementary school, I would always spend more time with the girls than I would the boys. Actually, my like first best friend was a girl. Well, actually, so here's a good story going into an instance of that kind of bullying that I experienced. So in the first grade, I had pretty much just two friends, one guy, one girl. And she was by far like one of my best friends, probably the best friend I've ever had until I've met my girlfriend 3 years ago. Like she was super. She eventually, her parents got divorced and she ended up moving away. So that kind of friendship got terminated after that first grade. But so the boy, I remember very clearly that overhearing that he was given a choice by like the other popular cool kids, the cool boys, that you can be in our group and be one of the cool kids, or you can stay with him and we'll bully both of you. And he ended up choosing to go with the cool kids and sacrificed our friendship to go be with them, and then kind of joined in on the bully. Which it's thinking back of it, that's interesting for, especially if my memory serves me correctly, because it was so long ago, but I've got pretty clear images in my head of that, that to kind of pose it in that kind of way to kids that are so young is just kind of interesting. But, and then of course those groups kind of stayed throughout the rest of the elementary experience, right? So you had your cool kid groups, and then there was like me, and then I would eventually make another friend who we were friends for a pretty good while, and it would be kind of them, they would always kind of pick on us, and that kind of just continued. And then that group kind of went to a different junior high school. So then me and my friend, we went to a different junior high school. So that kind of solved that problem. But then when we went to that junior high school, that kind of bullying and picking on me kind of persisted once again, because I was also like, I mean, the cool kids, it's kind of cool not to obey the rules. And I'm very black and white, fairness, rules, have to do this. So, I think I remembered once I told on a kid because he said like stupid or idiot. And I'm like, oh my gosh, he said a horrible, horrible curse word, teacher. Because I thought that's just what you were supposed to do, right? That like, oh, if kid says something bad, you tell the teacher. And then when he found out that I had told on him, he poured a whole thing of yogurt in my backpack and just completely ruined everything in there. And so that was kind of still in elementary, but then going to junior high, kind of the same thing persisted because I was still that kind of weird, awkward, quiet kid who was definitely a much more feminine man than masculine. And so I'm still the ugly duckling there. So the new cool kid group there, because the junior high school I went to was a little different in the fact that it was kindergarten to grade 9. So so when me and my friend came into this school, everyone there has that entire history. So we're even kind of further outsiders, right? Because all these kids, they went through kindergarten to grade 6 together, and now they're going to grade 7. But him and I are just kind of injecting ourselves new into this environment, right? So just kind of more bullying would happen. If you can see, I've got a pretty big nose. I remember in grade 7, like what some of these boys would do, and this is kind of horrible, but they, call me a Jew and like throw coins and loonies at me, which I just kind of laughed at because I'm like, well, loonies and toonies, I'll go across to, the gas station, buy all my friends candy, win for me. But you're kind of silly throwing money away like that. But, so just kind of things like that happened. And then eventually those kind of in high school, like I had mentioned, I kind of was like, I'm going to actually define myself and be someone instead of just kind of passively going along and taking all this. Oh, actually, that reminds me.
Maybe before we go before we go there. So you mentioned a couple of things. So my question
Mhm.
right now will be, what made you exactly different? And I think you mentioned two things. You spent more time with girls than with boys, and it seems to me that you had a very strong sense of justice, which was not always appreciated by your peers. Is that a fair summary? And is there anything else that you would give as an example of what made you different as a person from, let's say, your peers?
No, I think that kind of really captures it. That's all I can really say. Like I said, instead of just using that ugly duckling analogy, that kind of really kind of encapsulates that. Like I was just different, the goody two shoes, not the type of kid that kids like, especially boys like to kind of, play around and bend the rules, right? Um, it's also kind of hard because I'm thinking about it now because I've never really been asked that question per se. I've always just, it's one of those things you just kind of know why you were picked on, but you can't really articulate it, if that makes sense.
Well, one of the things could be that it's, and this is just me thinking out loud, so maybe I'm saying something wrong, so feel free to correct me. But being different, it depends on how you're different. Different per se itself doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be picked on, I suppose. Generally speaking, having a strong sense of justice, which means that it really bothers you to the core when something happens that is not right, whatever that something may be. And it sounds to me like that was certainly the case for you. And once again, feel free to correct me if what I'm saying is
No,
incorrect.
I agree with that. And I think that has to do a lot with, like trait conscientiousness per se, because that's kind of
Yeah.
where I think a lot of that comes out of. And I'm quite a conscientious person. So,
Look, one of the this is very interesting, and I'm curious what you think about this, especially now because you're an adult and you can think on this about this situation with the experience that you right now have. But human dynamics and social interactions are very complex and they're very nuanced, and that goes also for children. Children interactions are not simple, and if you are the person that would um, that will tell the teacher on someone else, for example, that would very clearly mark you as well, not necessarily as a threat. That will be the wrong word, but it would mark you as someone who can't be trusted, maybe because
as the other, as not tribe, because a tribe
yeah,
won't snitch on tribe kind of thing, right?
exactly, and it's a very strong driving force, I think. Um, so having that, it's a very hard one because truth is important, fairness is important, and fairness is a very strong word to a lot of people, also to children. How many times have you heard, for example, "That's not fair"? Children very
Mm.
young can say something, can say that already. So those are very strong concepts already for children, and if those are being breached, for example, by a situation like this, that could instantly change the um, the social interactions and the dynamics within that group for as long as you know them. Um, and it's especially with bullying, that's continuous. It's very hard to break that within the same cycle. And you managed to break it because you switched schools. And I think it sounds to me like that was the only way out of something like that.
Well, and so here's an interesting thing, and I was going to talk on this. So
Mm-hmm.
there's a few things that you brought up that are kind of interest. And I realized, so I think another reason why that was happening is because, in terms of the bullying was not only this sense of fairness and wanting to, tell the teachers, 'cause it's like, I want to, because I was always told by like my dad growing up, who I really admired growing up, but he was always
Mm-hmm.
away working. He was a firefighter. He worked a handyman job on the side. He virtually worked two full-time jobs for ever. He's still working, even though he's a retired firefighter now. He's still working a full-time job in, labor, and he's like mid-60s, and it's tough on him. But and he always told me, be a good person like your mother. So I was trying to, I think to a degree, I was trying to emulate my mother's aspect, hence why maybe I had this more feminine tilt and why I clicked more with the girls than I did the boys. But this is all to say that I developed a very agreeable outlook because my mom is I would reckon I'd go as far as that she's a hyper agreeable person. And so I was emulating that. So I think a degree why the bullying was persisted to an extent was because I thought the confrontation, of that without teacher intervention was wrong. And I was like, I want to be a good boy. Good people don't do wrong. The good thing, the right thing to do is to tell the teacher. So I'm going to tell the teacher. So I never really, because I think in a degree as well, world kind of tests you and shapes you. And because this is a theme that would actually persist into the workplace. Not that I was bullied in the workplace, but this agreeableness. And we'll get to that later because that's actually really interesting. But that maybe to a degree as well, all this bullying was happening was because it was like the universe trying to orient itself in a way for me to integrate my ability to stand up for myself, which I just was not doing. I was not standing up for myself. So that would allow the kids, he's an easy target kind of thing as well. In addition to, he's going to snitch on us kind of thing. So there's a lot of dynamics and it's not one clear answer. It's a multiplicity of things that are stacked up and mixed together.
Did it ever turn violent?
Not particularly. Like a lot of it, like I said, the kind of vocal stuff, the pouring of the yogurt in my backpack, for example, in elementary school in specific. There's maybe one case where one of the cool kids, we were playing kickball out in the school baseball diamond at lunch, and the kid thought I had tripped him, but he had tripped over his own feet because I was just I wasn't paying attention. I was off in la la land, as I often am and still do, just on the base, kind of minding my own business. And then he came over and slammed my head into the ground because he thought I had tripped him intentionally when he had just fallen over of his own accord and I was just in the area. Or he knew
that he fell by himself, but he didn't want to take
He was embarrassed.
He was embarrassed and he didn't want that, so he needed someone to blame.
Yeah, who knows, right? But so it was interesting. So as this kind of persisted, I remember distinctly, it was probably about the middle of junior high. I was walking home one day because I didn't want to take the bus because all the kids who would bully me were on that bus. Because I remember there's some times where I'd be sitting at the bus station or bus stop minding my own business. They'd come and take my backpack and run around, so I'd have to chase them for it. Or I think at one point they were trying to sneak up on me and crack eggs on my head, that kind of thing. But I remember, so there was one day, it was kind of middle of winter. I just decided to walk home. And I remember kind of falling down in the middle of the field, kind of in tears. And then I remember almost saying why God have you forsaken me? Because I was brought up Catholic and Christian. My mom's a very religious person. I'm now a religious person, but that was kind of the point where I probably took a more atheistic look on life, because I was like, why is all this stuff happening to me? I'm being a good boy. I'm trying my best to be good. And all this stuff is transpiring, right? I'm like, if you were real, you'd make it stop.
Right.
Well, I didn't realize this until much later, but the next day it stopped. And I remember actually one of the kids kind of coming up and actually apologizing, although it didn't really feel at the time like it's sincere apology. It was one of those things where it's like, I'm sorry, I made you feel that way kind of thing, where it's like, you're not really accepting responsibility for what you did when you say that, right? Yeah. But anyway, and that kind of, it really stopped at that point for about a few weeks. And of course,
What changed? Why did it happen?
All I can say is because I offered up that prayer and I said, if God, if you are real, make it stop. And then it stopped.
Was there anything going on at the time? So were your parents in contact with the school,
No,
or
no,
was there a parent meeting or something like that going
you
on?
know, it's funny. Probably the first time my parents are finding out about this is probably overhearing me talking about it now. I was very reserved and kind of internal, and I still am. I'm very, very introverted. I stay to myself a lot. So I was just kind of
Right.
processing this all very much on my own. Because like I said, my dad would often be away at work, up early in the morning, back late at night. And then when I got home, he'd just work on homework, or I'd just stick my nose in video games and just play video games all day long.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so it was really, I can't foresee any external factor outside of that it stopped. But at the time, I didn't realize it. And then after a few months of that, it kind of picked up again, but it was very soft. And then, yeah, once I kind of took more an interest in myself in high school, and I really kind of carved my own path, and I was less inner and I was more like putting myself out there, is kind of when it stopped for like good. Because I wasn't really bullied at all in high school. In fact, I was actually probably well regarded by most of my peers. And it's funny, like even thinking now in like professional settings, people just seem to like me, and I'm not doing anything special. I'm just some weird kid. But people I just seem to have a knack for getting along with people, and people just seem to like having me around. And sure, I'm not going to complain with that. But
This is usually a question I would ask at the end. It's a question of like, if you could give your younger self some advice, what would it be? It's that kind of question, but I will ask it right now. If you would go back to the time when you were encountering when you were dealing with this, what would you change? What would you do different in order to prevent this from happening?
honestly, personally, I wouldn't want to change anything because, like I said, it made me who I am today. And
Right.
I'm very happy with who I am today. And I'm very excited to see where I'm going to go.
Mm-hmm.
But, for the sake of the question, what I would say to kind of anyone going in that situation, and I think what I needed to hear was, it's not wrong to stand up for yourself. And the reason I say this is because, especially at least here in Canada, like the main parading message with bullying was don't bully. It was this kind of passive, hyper agreeable, like just no conflict. Whereas I think the message should be, don't bully, but we'll also teach you how to stand up for yourself, right? Because teachers aren't always going to be there. An adult figure and an authority isn't always going to be there to intervene. Now, of course, there's issues with that as well, because kids can get things out of hand. If you stand up, then it escalates and escalates and escalates, right? But to kind of frame it in the way of, you're not powerless, right? You don't need
No.
you don't need to shrive that responsibility onto an authority figure. You can handle it. Don't stoop to their level, and don't, eye for an eye, but, stand your ground. Like if someone tries to punch you, don't punch them back, but know how to, deflect a punch, or, know how to
Right.
de-escalate, know how to actually properly engage with combat or confrontation or conflict, right? Like to learn those skills instead of saying, nope, just don't even bother about that. Just stop. No confrontation, no conflict whatsoever, period. And then you never develop the skills of conflict resolution, right?
This is also what I'm making a little bit of a jump here, but this is also what they teach, generally speaking, in most martial arts schools. It's often being seen as, when people practice martial arts, whether it's boxing or kickboxing, MMA, karate, anything along those lines, that those people are probably violent and they are looking to pick fights on the street. It's actually quite the opposite. And if you are going to a respective school, they will actually teach you, like, hey, this is, we will teach you self-defense. And that means you are capable of defending yourself or the people that you love, or your house or whatever, when the time is there that you need to use it. It doesn't mean, and you are absolutely forbidden to use it if it's not absolutely necessary. So it's the beautiful thing there's a couple of beautiful things in that, because first of all, you learn that it's not about aggression, it's about standing up for yourself. And you also learn that you don't have to be afraid for everybody around you. You can be quite confident because you know that if something happens or if you're being attacked, you know that you can deal with that specific situation. But you can also not just defend yourself, but also the people that need it. So, for example, one of my teachers, one of my Krav Maga teachers, he had a situation a couple of weeks ago where he was doing shopping near a local supermarket, and he stepped outside. And for the picture, he's a really chill guy. A big guy. Bald, looks intimidating, but an absolute teddy bear. He's a very, very sweet,
gentle giant.
Yeah, he's a great guy. Anyway, back to the story. So he stepped out of the supermarket, and what he noticed was somebody harassing a woman. Being pushy, being... Yeah, you can imagine it. Just being completely very obnoxious and intrusive. His reaction was to step behind him, and give him a little tap on the shoulder, like, "Hey, dude, what are you doing? Stop harassing the lady. Take a walk." Something along those lines. In this specific scenario, the guy turned violent and he had a screwdriver in his pocket, and he grabbed a screwdriver and brought it towards, my teacher's face, who was very quickly, and because for him it's muscle memory, he's been practicing for like 30 years at least or something like that. He sideslept that screwdriver, hit the guy on the ear, and that was it. Just only what is necessary, nothing more than that.
Exactly.
But that's what it's about. That's what it's about, standing up for yourself and standing up for the people around you that need you. That's a beautiful way of putting it, Wyatt. It's absolutely very true what you're saying. It's about being confident.
Self-defense is not offense. This by name,
it's
right?
literally in the word.
Yeah, it's in the name. It's the whole intent behind it is to diffuse, to protect, not to aggress.
Yes.
And that's something kids, I think, should need to know, that you can stand up to bullies without being offensive. You can defensively stand up for yourself. And that's not wrong to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Like for example, in the case with your teacher isn't a bad person because he hit that other guy, because he's not hitting that guy in a malevolent way, right? He's doing it in a very defensive, like, you're forcing me to do this kind of thing.
Yes.
If you didn't do this, I wouldn't have struck you. It's very different from you're just standing there minding your own business and I'm going to strike you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
And
so if you didn't do anything, there will be a problem, because once again, you have a screwdriver situation, so you have to.
Yeah.
There's no choice.
And that's kind of to the point where I was saying, like, imagine if your teacher had instead, like, tried to, instead of slapping away the screwdriver and, discombobulating that guy, if you try to call for the police, well, then he's going to have a screwdriver in him, right?
Yeah,
it's
he's
not
gone. Yeah.
helpful to defer your responsibility of self-defense to the authority to resolve the conflict of your own accord. And that's something where it's like, to teach kids that, or to just teach people that in general, I think is very important, especially as society becomes kind of more hyper agreeable. Like, and something I wanted to ask you, Jeffrey, I know it's an interview with me, but because I've been wrestling with the idea of, and even my girlfriend thinks this is a good idea too, of going into learning a martial arts for the sake of self-defense, but not in a physical way, but in a very deeply spiritual and psychological way. Because I'm such a hyper agreeable person, I tend to, even if it's just verbal conflict, like we had mentioned, like you had given me your very thoughtful response on that post with my colleague. So we'll just pull on that for a little bit here. I wonder to what degree my agreeableness is because I'm also not physically capable of standing up for myself. I mean, I'm a pretty slim guy. I don't have a lot of mass. I'm not this big, huge, Arnold Schwarzenegger, cantankerous kind of dude, right? So I wonder to what degree, if I learned how to defend myself, if that would make me more willing to disagree, because I'm like, I mean, Peterson kind of makes this remark, and it's true to an extent that, underlying every kind of masculine male-to-male interaction is a threat of physical violence, that if disagreement gets too high, then, fists start flying. And I mean, you see that in bars, for instance, right? Not that that's civil society. But I think you can understand the point I'm building here is that if I disagree, maybe because of my past of being bullied so much and that kind of physical contention that I'm not able to contend physically, that's why I have trouble speaking up and disagreeing, is because if push came to shove, I couldn't shove, right? So I thought it'd be interesting, and I wonder if maybe you have any personal insight on that from thinking before you were in martial arts to after, if you noticed that the more competent you became in martial arts, the more willing you were to speak your mind.
Yeah, it's a good question, and a couple of things come to mind, and not all of them have to do with martial arts. If you are very agreeable as a person, that I think in most cases means you are less assertive. So that means that you have a harder time saying no or drawing, the lines that shouldn't be crossed by others. That by itself is not per se fixed with martial arts, although martial arts is a very good way to gain extra confidence, which might help mitigate some of those aspects of your personality. I think something like assertiveness training, which I'm sure we'll delve in later also, because it's also a big part of being a proper leader. If you're in a leadership position, you need to be, to some degree at least, you need to be assertive, because there are moments where your team or the people that you work with or the people that lead you, because leadership is not just downwards, it's also upwards, do something or say something that needs extra care or extra attention, and you might be the person to give that extra care and extra attention. So there's a couple of different fronts to approach this. I think, if I'm hearing you correctly, you're asking me how I feel, in my experience at least, how you can build confidence and how you can mitigate to some degree the trait agreeableness to be more assertive. Is that a correct way to ask your question?
It's cool. So I would say, like, more specifically, did you notice a change in yourself in terms of how you approached interpersonal relationships, especially, let's say like male to male interactions, before and after becoming proficient in like martial arts?
Well, I started martial arts very early. So I had a couple of breaks in my life, but I believe I was 5, 6, or 7 years old when I was doing judo for a couple of years, I believe. My trainer, actually, Joop Gouwenleeuw, he passed away, I believe, 5, 6 years ago or something like that. He was, if I'm not mistaken, either a world champion in judo back then or a national champion. But regardless, he was a big name. Joop Gouwenleeuw, great guy, for as far as I can remember. He taught me the basics of so I'm of the opinion that it is very important for children to do something like judo, because judo is an excellent martial art to throw a bunch of kids together and let them play with each other, while at the same time teaching them discipline and teaching them the limits of the human body. So if you and I are kids, right, or even right now, if you and I step into a dojo and we want to learn judo, we will not be there to hurt each other, right? That will not be the primary driver. We will be there to learn the art and to grow in it and to become more competent in it and to become more confident. I will help you learn and you will help me learn, and we will be as good as practice buddies as we can be. That's primarily the goal. You learn to, by interacting with each other, you learn to well, first of all, you are playing with each other, and every now and then, a throw happens, for example, or you get a sweep. You're being swept from under your feet or something like that. You know how it feels like, so you automatically knows what the other person is gonna feel when you do that to him or to her. So it teaches you what how it feels to be thrown or to be swept or in case of other martial arts, to be punched or kicked, which automatically gives you an idea of what you can expect in, let's call them raw situations, in the situation where you are outside and you're being attacked, for example. A lot of people in my personal experience are afraid of fighting. They are afraid of being punched or being grabbed. If you don't do this, but if you walk up to a random person and you grab them by the shirt, generally what happens is their arms go up and they're trying to protect their head or something like that. They contract, they flinch, they turn afraid, something like that. And by training those kind of situations, you know what you can expect of it, and you know how you can deal with situations like that. So you are getting not necessarily the muscle memory. You are gaining the insight in how a situation like that might unfold, and what you can do to prevent it from escalating. Which is also a very important thing to understand. It doesn't mean that if you get punched that you automatically have to knock the guy out. That's not how it is. You'd have to do the absolute minimum what is necessary in order to stop the confrontation. That literally might mean run away. That literally is so my teacher told me, if you have the chance, run away. Push someone away or whatever, and then run away. Take a run for it if it's possible. Okay. So a couple of random things over there. It teaches you, to bring it back to your original question, it teaches you how to deal with those situations and what it feels like, and it teaches you what you can do when somebody grabs you, sweeps you, something like that. Which I think builds confidence. It provides a very good framework to operate on. You have to be less afraid. You should still be aware, be aware of your surroundings, but you don't have to be necessarily afraid of it, if that makes sense. I hope this answers your question.
No, it doesn't, because in learning this physicality, there's a lot of implicit things underlying it that you kind of integrate into yourself as a person. Like, yes. I know when I was younger, actually, and this would be about elementary time, I know my dad had enrolled me and my brother in karate, but I know, at least myself personally, I didn't really take to it that much, because you're like, oh, karate, like ninjas fighting, da-da-da. But it really wasn't that, because a lot of what we did was just, practicing the stances, the more artistic side of the martial art.
The katas.
Yeah, the katas that are essentially kind of almost more of like a qigong or a yoga kind of stance, right?
Yeah.
Although there is a practical use for them that you go later, but as a little kid, when you're like, oh, I'm learning martial art, I want to fight. Kind of thing, right? And then you don't do that. There's a bit of a disconnect. But I remember in junior high, I really took to wrestling. But that was still kind of more just like an optional thing. I mean, I was on the wrestling team and I did go to a few events, and I was actually
Were you any good at it?
Not too bad. Pardon?
Were you any good at it?
Probably more than I'd give myself credit for. Like, I mean, it doesn't really... I've got 2 third place ribbons, but the groups were out of 4, so I was 3 out of 4. So it's like, yeah, third place, but it's not really anything to brag about, right? Kind of just a pat on the back kind of thing. But
right.
I know, like, in one of the wrestling meets, I did end up, like, I was actually, me and my friend from the same school, because there's a bunch of different schools, we were in the same weight class, and we were in the same group. So we went at it. So I was kind of going at a little more friendly thing. And then when we go in, I'm going down and he's going up, and the back of his head hits me right in the eye. And I get this big, huge black eye. Yeah. So it was funny. And then once I was okay and we settled that, we resumed the match. After that, I got the quickest pin of the whole night.
Right.
Because I was just like, okay, you're going to give me a black eye, buddy? I'm going to... It's kind of like a friendly kind of competitive thing. It's like, okay, it's on. But there's also an interesting story, actually, that I'm just remembering now. I remember in our like gym classes, when it would kind of, after the kind of wrestling lesson and we just kind of do free form, I remember challenging a guy who was like probably 3 to 4 times my size at the point. Like, he was a big guy, and I'm also a really small guy, but because I was just like, it's that kind of, I want to see if I can do it, right? I want to see if I can actually pin this guy who's like 3 times my size. I almost did, actually. I almost did. I just couldn't get him to put his shoulders back on the ground because he was just too strong. But because to a degree with wrestling, and I'm sure you can probably attest to this with judo, it's technique. It doesn't really matter too much how big someone is if you manipulate the body in the proper way, right? So to some extent, being small against a big guy can be advantageous because you're a little bit more nimble and you can get into positions better.
Well, it's a leverage. So with good technique, you can leverage power, strength. That's how generally it works. So if you have incredibly bad technique and you are very strong, you might get out of certain pins just because you have more muscle strength.
Just sheer brute force.
A sheer brute force, but it doesn't mean you're good. Somebody who, like, of course, if you have perfect technique, but you don't have any strength at all to the degree that that's even possible, then you might have trouble. But generally speaking, the rule is with good technique, you leverage strength. So the stronger you are, and in combination with the better your technique is, the more of a force you are in that specific art.
Right.
How long did you do the wrestling? So how old were you and how long did you do it?
So junior high, I was probably I only did it for junior high, and I think I did it the 3 years from grade 9, 10, or sorry, not grade 7, 8, 9. I think just grade 8 and 9. Yeah, so I think just the 2 years, I would say. I'm trying to think here because those memories are so distant at this point. It feels like a lifetime ago. It probably would have been 17. Probably 13, 14.
Okay. What belt were you?
Oh, I don't, it wasn't any, so with karate per se, with the belts, that's way too long ago because that was like elementary school. I have no idea. I think I was like maybe a yellow belt. What's like the one above white?
Yeah, yellow. Depends on the karate, I believe. Sometimes orange, I believe, is earlier, but generally speaking, it's yellow, indeed.
And then for the high school wrestling, there wasn't any grades or levels. It was just kind of you wrestle for wrestling's sake kind of thing, right?
Right.
But actually, I want to bring this back into the broader kind of topic that is essentially just agreeableness versus disagreeableness, right? Because that's what is really kind of the constant theme between, the bullying and the martial arts question and kind of everything we've talked about. Because I actually have a really interesting story regarding that, and it's actually funny, Adam, you had him on your show, he put a message on one of my posts offering to, do some practice kind of assertiveness training that I hope to take him up on soon.
Oh yeah, I saw that coming by. It was really cool of him to offer.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I've got him on Discord, so I'll probably send him a message and we'll look to connect sometime soon to do that, because I think that would be extremely beneficial for me, because I think that is one of the keystone things I need to learn, and I've got a really good story as to why. So I don't know if you know much about Jung's kind of theories on dreams. I don't know if you've ever heard Peterson mention it before in the past, or how much on that.
So I've heard more than half of all his podcasts, I believe. I read most of his books, so I probably know things, but I can't distill it down hey, this is the theory.
Okay, so I'll just give a brief little overview, because it'll be important for the story that I'm going into. So essentially, as you kind of go through life, there's only so much you consciously can focus on, and a lot of things kind of happen broader unconsciously, things you don't kind of you see but you don't really pay attention to, minute body languages, this kind of things like that, or stuff that you're doing that you just kind of are willfully blind to. So there's all this stuff that happens when you go to sleep and you're in your unconscious state. Your unconscious that is aware of all these things, because that side of your brain is nonverbal. It can only speak in a symbolic tongue. So it presents you these great dramas of symbols that are meant to present you with a message to help you address all these unconscious situations that are happening in your life that are impeding you from, kind of integrating into an individual. So learning how to speak that and learning how to interpret that will help give you insight into things you need to do in your life to kind of move forward and go forth as an individual.
Right.
Essentially, I probably really butcher that, but you'll kind of see what I mean as I tell this story.
Mm-hmm.
So keep in mind, during the course of this story, I had not studied any Jung. I had no knowledge of this. So when I was kind of in, kind of the middle section of that, 7-8 year period of working for this menswear, like luxury menswear corporation, I was very much like, I want to make this my career. I want to like climb up the ladder and be the very, very top one day. I had very much that kind of drive, but I always kind of struggled to go beyond the kind of entry level positions and get into sales, because at the time, the requirements to get into sales are very strict, because they deal with like the top like 1% of the 1% of people, right? Like it's very, very elite.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously they want people to be very professional, very strict, and very, the best of the best to serve the best of the best, essentially, right? So I was always struggling. Like, I'm like, I really want to do this. I really want to do this, but I'm not getting any traction. And for the longest time, I couldn't figure out why. And that was kind of perverting my view a little bit and making me a little bit more kind of bitter and resentful, because I'm like, here I am. I feel like I'm ready for it, but obviously no one else agrees to that. And so what am I doing wrong? I don't know, right? And during this period when I was trying to figure out how to get to that next stage, how I needed to conduct myself to get to this position I'm going for the next step forward on my path, I have this recurring nightmare. And the nightmare is I get chased by a bear, and I see the bear like kind of running at me from like a forest or whatever situation, even if it's like in the middle of the city. The dreams would always get to a point where I'd see a bear. The bear would charge at me. I would run. And then eventually the bear would catch up, consume me. And then I'd wake up like almost screaming. Like it was very, very visceral and very, very intense and very, very real. I mean, I personally, a lot of the dreams I experience, they feel just as real as like I'm talking to you now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very much like, it's very intense. Anywho, so this was happening, like I would have these dreams maybe every night or every other night for like weeks, for a period of maybe like 3 to 4 years. And I had a friend of mine in, the business who, funnily enough, we never spoke in high school, but he went to the same high school as me, and he was the only other kid wearing suits every day. And then just so coincidentally, we wound up working at the same store independently of each other and having never spoken. And him and I are both interested in like philosophy, psychology, and all this stuff. So it got to a point one day where, because we just kind of messaged outside of work. I was like, this keeps happening. I've heard the idea somewhere that, dreams are messages. So what is this trying to tell me? Because I want to be able to sleep at night, because it got to the point where I was kind of getting afraid to sleep at night because these dreams are so visceral. Like, I mean, imagine every time you go to bed, you get viciously mauled by a bear and it feels real.
Right.
You probably don't want to go to sleep.
No, it doesn't sound like it. Yeah.
So, and this is where it gets really interesting. So him and I are going through this, and we just found some random website that said, the dream where you're getting mauled by a bear means that you are avoiding conflict. And I was like, that makes a whole lot of sense. And then I was thinking about my situation. I think a lot of the reason I was not moving forward is because I'm too agreeable and I wasn't standing up for my own interests. I wasn't willing to engage in confrontations at work, like let's say asking for a wage, or even just simply asking for the position, because I didn't want to engage the conflict of like, hey, I want this job. No, you can't have it. Rejection, right? Because that short-term social disruption is what agreeable people don't like. They like long-term, they don't want to sacrifice the short-term social stability for the long-term social harmony. Whereas disagreeable people have no problem sacrificing the short-term to ensure the long-term in terms of social harmony. So I realized I was kind of viewing things in my life, and I'm like, I'm really not engaging in any conflict or advocating for myself at all. No wonder I'm not moving anywhere in the workplace, because I'm not advocating for myself. Things aren't just going to fall on my lap, right? I have to go kind of pursue these things, and I'm unwilling to do so. I just think by doing a good job, I'll passively receive recognition, but I need to like strive and, be more engaged, because it's not just enough to just show up and do my job to a T. I need to do my job to a T and then some, and, engage with management and actively, create a path for myself. So I was like, well, why don't I try doing that? So I tried doing that and, kind of stumble and fall. Eventually I would convince them and they were going to train me for sales. And then when that happened, COVID hit and then I was laid off. Like literally the month before, they were like teaching me all the things. I was going to go into the position and then COVID hit. And then I got back into eventually like after a month of being off, everything was kind of closed down. They needed extra support for their e-commerce side. And that's when they brought me into shipping and receiving. I was still kind of, I was kind of still wrestling with that because obviously there's a degree of like, I almost had it, right? There's a frustration that comes with that. And so as I'm kind of going through this, these dreams are still persisting. I'm like, I thought I figured it out. And then eventually one day, because this was a very tumultuous time and a lot of people are under a lot of stress, as I'm sure anyone can attest to going through the lockdown. It was a very tough period for everyone. I remember I was noticing that our general manager at the time was getting more irritable. I'm like, this is odd because he's usually he's a really standout guy. He's the guy who actually advocated for me the most in getting this position all those years back when I was first applying in 2016, because now we're in like lockdowns were like 2020, right? 2021, probably around there.
Yeah, I started over here in 2020, I believe, at the end.
So yeah, so after working alongside him for 5
Mm-hmm.
years, like he was a standout guy and he was never easy to irritate and he was always very understanding, very professional. But all of a sudden, something's different and he's getting a lot more, irritable, and he's kind of having little volatile verbal outbursts here and there. And it's like, this isn't like him. And no one's really saying anything because, well, who wants to speak up to the manager, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then eventually it just got to a point where I'm like, maybe this is what it means in terms of engaging conflict. Like, here's this dragon that's lying in our midst and no one's addressing it. So I remember one day, it was kind of perfect timing. He just had one of these episodes, and I'm not painting him as a bad person because he's not. We're human, we have flaws. There's reasons for people behaving the way they do.
Mm-hmm.
Regardless, like, he's a very good guy. I want to stress that point because this is a dark moment, a singular moment in his whole life story,
In the
right?
broader sense. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's we're human, we're all sinners, right? So I was like, this is my moment. I'm going to confront him on this because I know there was a time in the past where there was one day where I was working, where I was in a similar thing where I just got, because of my frustrations of not being able to get my goal, I was starting to get really bitter, kind of really resentful, really irritable, and I wasn't doing my best. And he had pulled me aside in the office one day and kind of just like a very friendly thing, like, hey man, kind of what's going on? This isn't like you. And I'm like, kind of broke down into tears and I'm like, you're right. Here's all these frustrations I'm dealing with. Anywho, now I'm presented a few years later with that same situation. And I'm like, I can be for him what he was for me if I have the courage to engage in this confrontation. And stars just aligned. He was in his office. There was no one in the back room. I had just witnessed this. So I was like, here's my moment. I've got nothing left to lose. Let's just give it a go. Because not that I was noble in that I wanted to save him, but I'm more so trying to run away from these nightmares about confrontation. So I confront him and I give him pretty much the same speech. I'm like, hey, what's going on, man? Like, and then there was initial kind of rejection because he kind of pushed back against this initial thing, like, what's going on?
What was the question that you asked him? What's going on?
Yeah, I forget the exact wording, but to kind of paraphrase, like, I went into his office and I'm like, hey, I noticed you've become, kind of more irritable lately, kind of what's going on? And then he kind of pushed back against that. Just kind of an initial defensive reaction, as anyone would if you called them on their less than stellar behavior, right?
Yes.
And then I was like, oh, well, I think you're misunderstanding me. I'm not trying to judge you or anything. Like, I'm not casting anything on you. A few years ago, I was in the same kind of situation going down a dark road and you helped me. I'm just trying to return that favor to you. It's the least I could do for you because you did it for me. I just care. And I know this isn't like you. I know there's something deeper going on that's bothering you. Well, what's going on? And then he opened up to me about all the stress as kind of a general manager. He's having to work virtually like 4 or 5 different roles in the job full time, kind of nonstop, just to accommodate for all the, just mess that had happened, right? And understandably so. And it's like, so you understand him in a completely different light, that he's just got so much on his plate. He has no idea where to even start in kind of eating this or how to digest all that. And then, kind of at the end of the conversation, he's like, Wyatt, thank you so much for, approaching me with this. And you're absolutely right. Like, I'm sorry. It's at the end of the day, regardless of what I'm struggling with, it's no excuse. And thank you for helping me see that. And I'm going to be better. And then, so here's where it gets really interesting. That night, I had a dream. A bear was coming and chasing me. It was chasing me and I was running and I was running. And then instead of running, I turned around and I picked up a rifle and I shot the bear dead. I have not had a bear dream ever since that moment. And this goes back to that introductory thing of what I was prefacing with Jung's theories of dream. And this, now keep in mind, I still had no idea about Jung at this point, but in that idea of what was preventing me from moving forward in life was my inability to assert myself in confrontational situations that needed to be addressed. It's the same thing in you've mentioned that, spending time with your wife, I've got my girlfriend. There's times in your relationships where you have to have a conflict. You just have to in order to move forward to better ground.
Well, it comes forward naturally and you have to deal with it. It's preferable to letting it simmer and turn into a big dragon, to use that word.
Yeah. So you have to confront these things. And then, that's unconsciously, all these problems in my life was because I was avoiding confrontation and I was never consciously aware of that. And that's why I kept having these dreams. And then once I made that unconscious situation into consciousness, I could actually grapple and wrestle with it. And then the dream kind of goes away and then I'm able to move forward. And then from there, everything kind of after that point starts kind of falling in line. I get put in position with a new kind of superior and she takes an interest in me and starts mentoring me to eventually to replace her position. And she was the market lead for 2 provinces, 4 stores total. And she wanted me to be her successor when she moved on from that role. And so everything kind of opened up because of this. And obviously that never happened because I ended up attempting to go back to school because I met my girlfriend and she's like, don't waste your time working retail, go pursue this stuff that you're really good at. And then that kind of goes back to our earlier conversation. And then I'm like, okay, I'm just going to work sales and then do Peterson Academy online if I'm going to spend that kind of money. But I'm getting a little off track here. So
maybe before we go there, because I really like the way you laid it out, that you were being haunted by this bear in the middle of the night, every single night or every other night.
Very frequent basis.
Yeah, which absolutely sounds terrifying. It must have been tormenting to you to experience that. Yeah, so finally being able to do something about that and in this case kill that bear and then letting it never show up again. To me, that sounds like a beautiful thing. And the way you approach this guy, like aside from the details, right? Because aside from the way that you approached it maybe and which questions you asked, it sounded like the end result was very, very good. You made him open up. He also gave you an opportunity, right? Because if this guy is like, hey, there's these 5 things I'm dealing with. I'm doing the job for 5 people all by myself. I'm overworked. I'm stressed out. I don't know what to do. Generally speaking, that if you put your negotiation hat on, that is a perfect opportunity because you can ask the question then, all right, tell me what I can do to help, right? Which might, that's good for so many reasons because it shows that you're a team player. It shows that you're empathetic. It shows that you're willing to help. It shows that you're willing to work. It shows that you're willing to take more responsibility. It shows that you're willing to grow and to do things that are outside of your strict, let's call them, your package of tasks, right?
Yeah,
It's
because keep
very,
in
very
mind
valuable.
the dynamic here. I'm just an entry-level shipper receiver. I'm submitting orders and I'm opening boxes. He's the general manager, right?
Right.
So the power dynamic, it's different. Like typically that person should not be doing that with the general manager, right? Generally kind of speaking.
That is true, but it does happen because, like you
Yeah.
said, we are humans, and
Yeah,
humans
exactly.
don't operate in a social dynamic according to the hierarchy all the time. So
Mhm.
it's very possible to have a manager who is very overworked, and it doesn't matter what your position is. Then, like if I am letting it go so far that I am completely overworked. I don't have sight of what I'm doing anymore, and I can't focus anymore. And if somebody, it doesn't matter who they are, but if somebody comes to me and asks me the question, how can I help? That guy or that woman is seriously gonna get some thumbs up for me. That's one of the best
Mhm.
things that somebody can ask you.
Well, I totally agree. And even in that point, like there wasn't really much I could do to help him, but he he wasn't alone in those struggles anymore, right? This wasn't just something he himself was dealing with and no one else knew. He had some sort of camaraderie in that sense. And I think that's what was most valuable to him was like, someone else knows what I'm going with, right? I'm not kind of
Just the
alone
empathy,
here.
yeah.
And then, so yeah, like I want to get to talking a little bit more about kind of leadership with you because you've expressed some interesting things on Peterson Academy, but going back, because keep in mind with all this, I still haven't encountered Jung's theory on dreams.
Right.
I just kind of
You just went through
gone
it with
on
the
a
guy.
hunch, on an
Yeah.
intuitive thing. Like I've heard dreams have meanings. There must be a meaning because I can't take having this dream anymore. And then all
hmm
this stuff unfolds as I described, and it's just like magical, right?
hmm
So, and then I eventually, I think I heard Peterson on some lecture talking about Jung and his theories on dreams. I'm like, okay, I'm going to look into this. And now I'm going to read you a passage from, right, where is it here? Actually, it won't help for people on video, but this book, I ended up encountering Man and His Symbols from Jung. And there's a passage in this book. So keep in mind everything we've just been talking about.
hmm
I had no knowledge of this passage, and I'm going to read it to you. The familiar dream in which the dreamer is pursued by an animal nearly always indicates that an instinct has been split off from the consciousness and ought to be, or is trying to be, readmitted and reintegrated into life. The more dangerous the behavior of the animal in the dream, the more unconscious is the primitive and instinctual soul of the dreamer, and the more imperative is its integration into his life if some irreparable evil is to be forestalled.
hmm
Verbatim, exactly what I was going through, right? Because
hmm
my this need to have the courage to advocate for my own interest, I had split off from my consciousness because of all the bullying I was told, not to be a bully, not to engage in conflict, not to do all this. I had repressed the entire necessity, the entire skill of conflict resolution because of kind of what I experienced growing up and repressed that. And it needed to be readmitted and reintegrated into life because you have to deal with conflict. There's no getting around it. You have to know how to resolve these things with people in your life because you're always dealing with people and you're always going to have other interests and they're always going to be kind of mix and matching and you're always going to have to negotiate to get to an end goal where everyone wins. And so the more dangerous the behavior of the animal in the dream, the bear was ripping me to shreds by the end of the dream. I don't think you can get more dangerous than a giant kind of grizzly bear tearing you to shreds. The more unconscious and the more primitive that is, because, and I personally agree, like if you look at personality trait distribution for trait agreeableness, women are more agreeable than men and men are more disagreeable than women on
Yes.
average.
Yes.
I'm a man, I'm not a woman. I'm hyper agreeable. My very kind of masculine essence in this disagreeableness, I completely, it's primitive. Like this need for conflict as a man, there's something primordial and primitive about that. And it needs to be integrated into everyone's life. So there's kind of the two extremes, right? Either it's not integrated because you're like a criminal and you're just physically lashing out at people, or it's not integrated because you're just not engaging in conflict whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
And to get to the middle ground is, what we were talking about in martial arts is kind of the minimal necessary force to resolve the conflict. And so, correct me if I've got that wrong, by the way, because it sounds like you want to say something.
No, that makes sense.
Okay. I wasn't sure if that was a sigh of realization or of I want to say something. Okay. And then, so the more imperative its integration into his life if some irreparable evil is to be forestalled. Well, think about that situation. Obviously, as a general manager, if you're in an irritable mood and you're being overly confrontational about the smallest things, you could see that being some irreparable evil, so to speak. Obviously, it's not an high order evil, but it's these little evils, little dragons that pop up in our lives. So because I integrated the courage to engage in this conflict, I was able to forestall that evil, quotation marks, heavy emphasis on that, because I'm not painting him as an evil person, but obviously that's not proper conduct, so to speak. I think anyone could agree that in any situation, if you're being like that in a professional setting, that it would be improper. But because I engaged in that, it forestalled that. It helped him take back stock and realize, okay, I don't have to go down this path. I can go a better way forward, despite of all the stuff I'm, kind of wrestling with personally. And so when I encountered that passage in the book, I had to put the book down and just walk away, because I'm like, it's like prophetic. It's like, how does it, it like verbatim in its own way of speech, it said exactly what I was going to the most precise kind of level of detail. Like, it's just mind blowing. And from that point on, I'm like, oh my goodness, Jung is just a genius. Like, because at least personally for me, it's like with a personal experience like that, how do you dispute anything that's said there, right? Like it's so hard. And if he's right about that, what else is he right about, right? And that's what got me into the big kind of fascination with Jung. For the readers, I'm kind of pointing to my big shelf of Jung books up there. I just kind of went down this rabbit hole and I'm like, I need to know everything this guy has ever written, because it's just like, it's just so utterly profound and just life-changing. And I've been able to replicate it in other instances. Like there was a degree when I kind of got into sales and I moved over into my new position. I mean, it's not like conflict in my willingness to and unwillingness to contend with it has gone away just because I'd had that experience. It's kind of like, I don't know if you're familiar with Sisyphus, of the man who got punished by the gods to roll the boulder up the hill only for it to fall back down and him to start it again the next day. You can get the boulder up the hill like I did in that situation, but then eventually that boulder is going to be at the bottom and you have to do it again. It's kind of this of going to higher and higher resolution. And that's where I think
challenge.
Yeah. Just because you understand something doesn't mean you're the master of it. You just understand it. And so in my workplace now, there's all these other kind of confrontations. I'm noticing that because I don't have the seniority like I did at my other company, I kind of have a hesitancy as the new guy. Just in my work setting, I think I described it in the post that most of the people there that I'm working with have been there for 20 some years. I'm just the guy who's been there for 1 year, right? Like, I don't want to be the guy to start causing all these problems, even though they still need to be happening. Well, so get a load of this, because I mentioned that story, and there's some other stories that I won't get into right now, but there's other conflicts that have arisen in that workplace that are of a completely different nature and need to be contended with, that I have reverted and kind of regressed. I'm down at the bottom of the hill with a boulder now of needing to contend with. Well, I had this dream where I was on a ski lift going down a hill at night to the bottom of the ski hill. Well, out of the forest emerged a bear that had like half skin, half skeleton, like this undead bear, kind of rose up out of the forest and just stood there on its hind legs and looked at me while I was going down the mountain. So it's like, okay, the conflict, this bear, it's not dead, it's undead, it's still there. I still have to confront and contend with it. Just because I conquered it once doesn't mean it's gone away forever. And now I'm at the base of the hill where I need to work my way back up again to the top of the mountain, to the summit, right? So it's just like the fact that I've been able to apply his theory of dreams in other dream instances and stuff like that. It's like, developing this kind of conversation, because I now keep like a dream journal and all this stuff to kind of keep track of it. And it's to the point now where sometimes I naively don't even write down my dreams, because I'll just wake up and be like, I get it. Because I've learned how to speak with my unconscious. I know its language now. I know how it uses animals and all these symbols. And I know, because all the dreams are deeply personal. Jung goes on in his series that only the dreamer can understand the dream because of its hyper-personal message. And its message, like in his kind of psychoanalytics, it's about, in dream interpretation, it's helping people understand the language of their dreams so they can develop this dialogue with their unconscious and bring that unconsciousness into their conscious life. And because I've been able to do this to a degree, it actually has helped me in a numerous amount of situations where I have a problem, I'll go and I'll dream about it. And then the answers, if I'm smart enough to interpret the dream, which I'm often not, the answer's there. But yeah, it's fascinating to me.
It's funny how consciousness works like that. That it gives you signal like an inner voice does you and tells you when you did something wrong, for example, to call you upon it. And in this case, it's something that you experience that then gets transmuted into a dream that then gives you an insight in pretty much the essence of what's causing that. So you have the tool in hand, as long as you can interpret it, because of course, to do something about that. And that's a very, well, philosophical is not really the right word for it, but it's a very good method to keep yourself on the right track, I think, and to make sure that you don't go off track too far, because you will get a warning that will tell you, hey, there's something going on that you need to do something with. I think, practically speaking, there's also a couple of things to consider. So back to that event, right, where you went to the manager and you didn't really confront him, for as far as I'm concerned, but you just discussed your experience with him. It sounds to me, and tell me if what I'm saying is wrong. It sounds to me, or at least it feels to me, that generally speaking, people who are higher in agreeableness care more about keeping relationships intact and are more afraid of offending other people or to make other people upset. So they want to prevent, by all means, to make the other person upset, even though what they have in their mind of what they want to say doesn't necessarily isn't necessarily upsetting to the other person at all. So they're very accommodating in that sense. They want, once again, the relationship is the most important thing, pretty much.
Yeah, and then you can see that because with agreeable people, they are more interested in people than things.
Yes.
And with disagreeable people, they're more interested in things than people. And so you can see that dynamic kind of playing out, and that is an element of that kind of broader, short-term social harmony that I was kind of talking about earlier as well.
So one of the things that I learned, because I'm generally a bit more disagreeable than you are, I'm in the middle. So I'm able to be influenced if somebody is influential enough. Let's just say it like that. But I am not afraid of saying no, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who in the company it is. If it's a director or if it's an operational frontline person, it doesn't really matter. If there's a bad idea, I will say it's a bad idea, and I will tell why it's a bad idea. And maybe my thinking is wrong, but we'll figure it out once that argument is being laid out. Point I'm trying to make is there's a couple of tactics that you can use to prevent that, especially for agreeable people. I think this is very true. There's a couple of techniques that you can use to prevent offending the other person. And for example, one of the big things, let's say you are the manager, right? And I'm the person that has to deal with you being angry or shouting all the time or whatever. If I can ask you the question, hey, Wyatt, what are you doing? Why are you behaving like this? Something along those lines. The what and the why questions. But that will probably come into your mind as, okay, this guy is asking me to explain myself, which might be a very annoying start of the conversation. Because, already from the beginning of the conversation, your defenses are going to go up, right? Because I'm here right now telling you to explain yourself. So that's, generally speaking, not an ideal approach to well, not even generally. I don't think there's any situation where that is ideal, to let somebody instantly explain themselves like that.
Oh,
So
totally
what I
agree.
generally what I generally do in those situations, and this is straight out of the book from Chris Voss, who is a ex-FBI negotiator. We discussed this before. He wrote a book,
Yeah,
Never Split the Difference. What he often does, or one of the tips that he gives, is make non-accusatory questions. Something like, or inquiries. Something like, in this specific situation, I could ask you something like, hey, Wyatt, it feels like you're dealing with a lot of stuff. Or, it sounds like you're really struggling with something. Or, it feels like you are really being bothered by something. Something like that.
Right.
And then, yeah, do you think that will raise your defenses up, a question like that?
No, it's a little more open, and it's a little more like you're just reaching a hand out. You're not pointing a finger, right?
Right. Because we are collaborating, right? We need to find a solution together. I don't need to piss you off. There's no value in pissing you off at all. I don't get what I want, and you very likely don't get what you want. So if you start with a question like, hey, Wyatt, there really seems to be something that's bothering you. And is there anything I can do to help you with that? Something like that. Those kind of conversations, generally speaking, they are a lot. So there's a couple of things. They are way more fruitful because you present yourself as a person who is capable and willing to collaborate, which is also an opportunity for you, in the sense of, like, you might be able to gain some more responsibility for certain things within your job. But it also makes it easier to approach people in conflicts. Whether you are agreeable or not doesn't matter, because with a question like, it feels like you're really struggling with something.
Yeah, it's not a
something like that.
confrontational question. It's a compassionate question. Yeah.
Exactly. So it makes it way easier to start a conversation like that.
And so kind of going back to like my situation, because this is, something I kind of learned about it, but because my first initial approach was a little bit more on that kind of pointing finger, kind of accusatory, confrontational approach. And you could see in that story how when I did that, the first response wasn't an opening up and a discussion. It was a pushback against that.
Yes.
So I noticed right away in that situation, I'm like, oh, I did not word that the right way at all. That is not what I meant. This is not the response I wanted to get. I missed the mark. And that's where I try to turn that around into like, whoa. I think I might not have articulated myself clearly. Not that I said this verbatim, but the essence of what I'm saying is, I'm stupid. I don't know what I'm doing. I notice there's a problem. You helped me before when I had a problem in a similar state like this. I'm just trying to help you the same way. And then once I did that, it kind of opened up. Like I'm not by any means like a leadership expert, but you can see in that dynamic how I started with the accusatory, and then I fumbled my way into the more compassionate approach. And then once he recognized that, that's when he took the hand and kind of opened up, and we got to the ground of resolution. Is kind of what I'm trying to say.
Definitely. That's also one of the things I wanted to mention earlier on. Because you might think, okay, semantics, right? You said something different before than now, but I think this is a really crucial point, because in your original story, you followed his reaction up with the comment, I think you misunderstood. And right now, the second version, how you're laying it out right now, like, hey, I might have, I very likely misrepresented what I meant, is a way better one, because once again you have the there's an implicit finger pointing in, I think you misunderstood,
and just you in general.
Instead of something like, hey, sorry, this is not what I meant, I said it wrong, or I might have misrepresented, or I misrepresented what I actually wanted to say, so let me start over if that's okay with you. Something like that.
Yeah.
That makes it a lot easier.
A lot of the really important leadership lessons I kind of learned kind of stemming out of this, because this was very early on. I was very kind of mature to a degree, and I'm kind of learning, right? And you have to stumble along while you learn. My manager, who I got into contact after that, who I mentioned was kind of mentoring me. I don't know if you've ever read Habits of Highly Effective People.
I have
That's
it
a
here.
great book. Oh, so you know.
I haven't read it yet, but I do have it.
Oh, you do not? Okay. Well, you should
Yeah.
maybe move that up on your list. It's a phenomenal book. She actually took the
Yes.
time with me outside of work to do like a little book club, and we went through that book chapter by chapter with each other, and that was just like amazing. Like it was so helpful, and I learned so much about leadership that had I known then in that situation, I probably would have handled it with a little more
Yep.
grace. I still stumbled and got to the desirable endpoint of that, but it could have definitely been a lot better than it was. And that's where your critique's coming in. It's like, for those listening and how to engage with these situations, here's kind of the explanation behind that. Here's what went wrong. Here's how it could have went better.
Yeah, I haven't read the book myself yet, so I don't have an opinion about it, but I do know it's one of the most popular leadership books out there.
Oh,
and that says
phenomenal.
a lot, I think. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it's really great. I would I think that's a book everyone should read in their life. Like it should be taught in like mandatory school curriculum.
Yeah.
I think it's that good. I
Yeah.
have nothing but praise for that book.
Yeah. Yeah, I would make that argument for leadership in general. So I think it's not leadership training or assertiveness training is not just for people who want to become leaders. I think it's good for everybody because it teaches a couple of skills that are like negotiation, what we just discussed, right? Negotiation is not just you negotiating with your manager or you negotiating with a business partner about a deal or something like that, or you negotiating with your car salesman to get the best price for your car. Yes, that is negotiation, but negotiation is happening all the time. I would not even be surprised if you in your daily life you negotiate without you maybe realizing it 20 to 30 times at least a day. Every human contact is a negotiation pretty much. So
keep in
having
mind,
the tools...
I'm in sales, so everything I do is a negotiation.
Okay, so you are way above those 20-30, but it's so incredibly important to be able to negotiate properly.
But but even just like your regular life, any conversations you'll have with your wife, your parents, your siblings, anything.
Absolutely.
Every human interaction is like a negotiation. And in that, I'm going to kind of go into 7 habits of highly effective people here for a bit, because he actually talks about negotiation and kind of like the 5 different approaches. Win-lose, lose-win, win-win, lose-lose, or I think the 5th is like win-win or no deal. And so essentially, and this kind of goes back to my situation with conflict, and that big story was I was going a lose-win approach in my workplace. I was taking the loss so other people could win. So no wonder why I was continually losing, because I wasn't advocating for myself because of this hyper agreeable modality of I'm going to sacrifice myself because I want everyone else to flourish.
Because you want to keep the relationship intact.
Yeah. And then, so the win-lose is kind of more disagreeable. I'm going to win, but you lose. I'll do what's good for me. I'm not going to care about your interests. I'm going to advocate for my own interests. Where in the previous example, I'm not going to advocate for my interests, but I'll advocate for yours. And then he proposes the best way forward is win-win, where you advocate for your own interest and the interest of the other. And if you can't reach a point where both people's interests are being met in the negotiation, like obviously the ideal is that you can, and that's the best way forward. And that's where kind of win-win no deal comes into places. Certain times it's good to, and I think you've posted about compromise before, where it's like, sometimes it's not good to make a compromise. And if you can't get to win-win, then no deal. And then there's lose-lose, where both parties kind of lose and no one's interest gets met, right? Yep. So it's a fascinating approach. And I kind of learned a lot about my interpersonal negotiation through that book. But it does actually sound like I should read this Chris Voss's book, because that sounds like it's a pretty good book as well. And I also should probably reread that book
more
too.
Aligned with him also. So indeed, I posted this question, and the question was, it was more like a statement, and to ask people to think about that. And the statement was, compromise is always suboptimal.
Mhm.
And then I got some I got some dust for that because somebody thought I stole it from Jordan Peterson, which I did not. Because in the podcast with Jordan Peterson was actually trying to argue that there are that there are situations where compromise is can be optimal.
Mhm.
I'm of the opinion that compromise is not optimal in no situation at all, for the very simple reason that, and this is. So Chris Voss lays it out like this. If you want to wear a black suit with black shoes to a wedding, and your girlfriend wants you to wear white shoes,
Mhm.
then compromise in that specific situation literally is you wear one black shoe and you wear one white shoe. That's it. We are meeting in the middle ground. That's it. So if I want 2,000 euros or dollars for something, and you want $3,000 for something, we're gonna go for 2,500. That's compromise. And the reason why compromise is never optimal is it doesn't engage us, both parties, to seek together the most optimal outcome. And
Where
because
everyone's interests are being met.
Exactly, and you
'Cause
haven't
if you-
even explored that
yeah,
because you're going
yeah.
for the compromise.
Yeah, and when you compromise on something, your interests are not really getting met, and neither are mine. It's kind of a lose-lose. 'Cause
Exactly.
I wanted to wear black shoes. You wanted white shoes.
We
I
both
go
give
black and a
something up.
white. No one wins. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it doesn't even have to be so. It doesn't even have to be something specific that you lose,
Mhm.
right? So once again, let's go for the example that you want $3,000 for something, and I just want to pay $2,000, right? So we go for 2,500. You and I, it might on paper be a good deal for whoever. It doesn't really matter. But you have in your mind that you didn't get what you wanted. And
Yeah.
I have in my mind that I didn't get what I wanted. So the fact that both of us maybe did get what was the best outcome doesn't matter. It's irrelevant because we are both sitting with a feeling that we didn't get the deal that we wanted to get.
Yeah, you're
which
not
makes
really
us less
enthused about the outcome. You're just like,
Yeah, we're not excited about the outcome.
Yeah.
And that's what compromise does to you, does to people. So I don't think there's any, and I fully 100% agree with Chris Voss on this one. I don't think there's any specific situation where compromise is the best way forward. Not in relationship, not in business deals, not in arguments, not in anything. I don't think so.
No, I completely agree with that point. And my thing is, if there's always a way to make everyone's interests met. There's always a way. You might not see it at first. You might not have the skill to get it, but there's always the path forward where everyone wins. And that's what you should strive for and keep in mind in kind of all your interpersonal relationships. Like, for example, I sell, luxury suiting for a living. Customer comes in, they want to look good. I want to make a sale. I want to make them look good. They want to look good. But like to boil it down into a lower level resolution, because I'm probably the only salesman there who doesn't sell. Because I don't want, when I'm working with a customer and a client, I don't want them to feel like they've been sold. Because no one wants, I want to make them feel like they bought something. So they're like, I want a navy suit, blue shirt, navy tie. I'm like, okay, I've got these. Here's all the options. Here's all the different shades and all the different things. Let's get what you want. And I'll stick to that. Whereas maybe, someone will go like, oh, but what about a light shirt as well? Kind of thing, right? I always let the customer
about the
make that
expensive
decision.
branded stuff.
Yeah, I always let them make that decision themselves. And I'll be like, okay, well, here's the different models, lowest end to highest end that I have in your size. Sometimes in a person's size, I only have the most expensive thing. And it's like, I don't want to show you this, but I have no other choice because it's all I got for you, right? And it's just like, because it's kind of awkward. And, you come up to our suiting area and you see these like hundreds and hundreds of suits. And it's like, as a person who's not in the industry and doesn't know, it's like, you're not going to assume that I don't have your size, right? You're going to assume that I have a size there. So if I bring you the only thing I have in your size and it's the $3,000 suit, you're going to be like, oh, this guy's just trying to, pull something over my eyes, but that's not my approach. Anyway, I'm kind of going on a tangent here. But
Well,
my
there's
point,
also an there's also an opportunity in there, because if somebody comes to you and lays out their wishes, and you know from your end that that's gonna be the most expensive option that there is, you can be very upfront about that
oh,
and
and
say
I
so.
often am, I'm like,
Yeah,
I'll just call it as it is. I'm like, hey, look, like all I've got in your size is this one. It's, it's, I'll just call it, I guess it is like, hey, it's the most expensive one here. I'd like to show you other options, but this is all I've got. Right. So I'm very mindful of that. And the point of me being is like, I'm a salesman who doesn't sell, so to speak, is like
hmm
the customer comes in to me with a need, and my objective isn't, I'm going to sell you as much merchandise as possible. My objective is, I'm going to get you what you came in for.
the experience.
And yeah, the experience, the
Mm-hmm.
catering, everything about that. And I'll get you the right items for what you're needing. And if I don't
hmm
have that for you, I'm not going to try to force you into getting something you don't want, nor am I going to try to force extra things on you. Now, if in the exchange I fit you for your main objective, then you're like, hey, you know what? I'd like to look at this. Then I'll show you it. Right.
hmm
And I have actually been ironically like effective in that, because he actually, I won't get into that, but because I don't want to get into actual like numbers and details, but I've done pretty well for myself with that approach in sales, because I think there's a genuine ethic to that. Because most people, when they go into like, especially like, let's say a cars dealership, because there's almost this kind of adversarial, like, oh, all these salesmen, they're kind of like shady, sneaky kind of guys. It's like, I don't want to be that. That's not my goal. Because my goal, this goes back to the earlier conversation, is I know what a profound impact dressing better had on my life. I want to share that with you. I don't want to sell you stuff. I want you to make your own image for yourself, right?
People want the human experience.
Mm-hmm.
If I just as a regular human walk into a store and I want something, whatever, in this case it might be a suit, I am absolutely, like every other human on the planet, I think, am absolutely not interested in being sold something. So if you come to me and you're really asking, what I'm looking for, what my experience is, what the end result should be, what the setting is of what I'm buying. Is it for a wedding? Is it for a business party? Something like that. And you walk me through through the process, and you are at the same time preparing me for certain things, and you are honest to me. Like, for example, if I give you specific parameters that you know are going to lead towards the most expensive suit, what I really would appreciate is if you would say something along the lines of, okay, what you're asking me, you have very good taste, clearly, because then you're kind of giving a compliment, right? And everybody likes compliments. But at the same time, I'm going to shock you. And I'm like, whoa, okay, you're going to shock me. What's up? The only thing I have in your size that fits these specific parameters is $3,000. You will get a very beautiful suit that will last you a very long time, and it does everything that you want it to do, and it will look absolutely stunning on you, but it is not cheap what you're asking me for. That upfrontness, that honesty, and especially
Transparency.
by exactly, and especially by preparing me in the beginning, like, hey, I will shock you right now with what I'm gonna say next. That prepares me for what you're gonna say next. Without, yeah, I'm more open to listen to you.
Mhm.
I'm more inclined to enter a deal with you just because of that alone.
Yeah. And one of the big things I do as well is like, if something doesn't look good, like, no, this isn't the one we want, right? I point
Very
it out.
good.
I don't try to be like, hey,
Yeah,
no, it does look good, or we'll do it. It's like, no, I try to get you in the best looking thing from the starters, and then I'll
yeah.
bring in our tailors to get you all fitted and get that to a better looking degree. But if I don't have something right for you, I'm not going to
Hmm.
pressure you into doing that. And now sometimes in certain situations, like a guy will come in, I've got a business meeting tomorrow, I need something for, and he's a fit that can't be fit off the rack. It's like, you know, there's certain times where it's like, it gets into those gray areas where it's like, I'm very upfront. I'm like, look, under perfect conditions, like, here's all the problems with it, but balls in your court now. Like, you left it to the last minute kind of thing. Not that I say that, but in that situation, there's these intricacies where it's like, well, I can only do so much with our services.
hmm
And as transparently as possible, here's what we can do in this given situation. Balls in your court. What do you want to do?
hmm How do you deal with overpromising?
I don't know. I always underpromise.
Roger. Okay.
And sometimes it's to my own deficit, because I know, like, to be a little bit more assertive, because sometimes people want a definitive answer.
Mm-hmm.
And they want you to be clear and they want you to make a promise. But I also like, because let's say something happens and all our tailors get sick and I can't fulfill my promise. So there's a certain degree, because I'm not the one personally altering them. But I always try to find, once again, this win-win approach. I always try to find the best way forward with them and, make sure that the boundaries are very clearly set and the expectations between us are very clearly set before going forward. If there's a sense of there kind of being that kind of friction, right? I don't know if that fully answers your question, but.
Well, the reason that I'm asking is because people who score high on agreeableness and people who value relationships very much, and therefore people who are less assertive statistically, they are very prone to overpromising because they want to make the other party, they want to keep the relationship intact. They want to provide something to the other person in the relationship. So they are very prone to overpromising, which may obviously lead to issues. So that's the reason why I'm asking if you're also dealing with that. But it sounds to me like, at least right now, you don't. You are underpromising on purpose. You are very conscious about that.
Yeah, and if there's a case where it's like they need an answer and I'm not comfortable with giving one, I'll just like, hey, excuse me, I'm going to go talk with, the owner, because I'm in the good fortune where I'm working in a business where I can just go into the owner's office and talk to the guy whose name is on the building of the store, right? Or talk to the person who, if it's a tailoring thing, talk to the tailoring manager and be like, hey, what can we do in this situation? How can we like move around things in our shop or yada, yada, yada. And then I can go back to them and be like, here's the plan, right? I'm very, very mindful with customers. I don't really have a lot of problem in being over agreeable with customers per se, which is odd. It's mainly, and I wonder if this is to the more intuitive or introverted side of me, that because I'm very introverted and sales is a very extroverted domain, and the best salesmen I've noticed have been the most extroverted ones. I've learned to cultivate that a little bit, but you can almost frame it as an element of it as the introverted person likes one-on-one, long, sustained kind of relationships, where the extroverted person is a little bit more with like, introverted wants the depth and the extroverted person is like the short
little bit of
kind
everybody.
of, yeah, exactly. Right. And you can see how that's beneficial in sales, because sales is a little bit of everybody, but eventually, like, because we're not selling suits, we're building relationships. That's the business. So it is a long-term thing, but you have to start. So you kind of balance both these things, because you start with those small interactions and then you build and build and build upon them. But a lot of my agreeableness, the faults of it at least, manifest themselves more so in the staff environment than it does the customer environment, because it's a completely different dynamic, right? Because these are people you're going to, for sure, guaranteed going to be seeing every single day. So I wonder if that's an element of it, compounded with my introvertedness of wanting to sustain these long-term relationships, right? I think you get what I'm getting at here with that. And why, in the customer side, it's not so much of an issue, because I'm approaching that with a very different ethic, because it's a very different dynamic.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's a couple of questions I wrote down earlier, and they don't hook into what we just discussed, but it hooks into what we discussed earlier. And I'm still curious in what you think about this. So, the moment you hit grade 9, you switched schools, and you said that your strategy for the new school to prevent bullying from happening again was to dress up nicely. What made you come to that conclusion? Because it doesn't seem to me like something that a kid generally thinks about. Like, hey, if I dress up nicely, that will, in a 3-piece suit or whatever, that will prevent this from happening. How did you make that connection? Where did you get that from?
So I had this intuition in junior high school, moving into it, that like, because another very integral aspect that I haven't really touched upon is, I had a kind of need, a burning desire pretty much ever since I had that first really good friend who was a girl in elementary school, for a relationship. And so a lot of my focus in high school and junior high wasn't schoolwork. It was trying to get a girlfriend. And so to a degree of that, what led me to the thought, it's like, how, because I thought the best approach was like, I don't care about appearance. I want a actual person based on personality, so I'm not going to care about my appearance. And then I had the thought where I'm like, especially after watching a lot of these like YouTube videos on, you know, menswear and all this kind of stuff of how to dress properly and all that kind of stuff, I came to the conclusion where it's like, or the realization that like, if I don't care about myself, how can I expect anyone else to care for me if I'm not willing to do that first? So it became this kind of like ethic, the spirit of, I, it's kind of hard to word. It's like, I'm going to start taking care of myself because that shows to you that I'm a person who cares. And I think that is kind of receptive because it's like, well, look, if this person cares about himself, the likelihood that he's going to care about me is a lot higher, or something kind of approximating that. It's kind of hard to describe, but it stems from that ethic of, if I don't care about myself, who's going to care for me? Like, why would anyone have any reason to care about me if I'm not willing to do it myself? And this kind of goes to Peterson's point in, treat yourself as someone you're responsible for helping, right? I forget the exact rule of life, but I'm sure you know the one. And I think it's very much that ethic, which is funny because that idea of, and this is why Peterson captured my attention so much, is I felt like he was expertly articulating a lot of things that I knew but never formulated or articulated. Like, once again, because what I'm describing here is very much that I came to the conclusion that I needed to treat myself as someone I was responsible for. And that people, sorry, I'm rambling, but it's kind of complicated and I've never really been asked this question before. So I'm trying to articulate the inarticulable here. Well, I find a lot of my personal thing just get sidetracked a little bit here is I have this intuitive understanding of things, and it's like an implicit understanding. And I have a big difficulty in translating that into an explicit thing. So I have the answer for your question in my mind implicitly, but I have no idea how to explicitly word it. So I'm trying to stumble through that with you here, just the way my brain works and my, just how I am temperamentally.
It's the best way to think.
And so it's very much that, like, once I took the responsibility upon myself to care about myself, that there's something kind of radiant about that is attractive to other people. And then that brings people who are attractive to that into your setting. So before, when I didn't care, it irradiated a certain aura and that attracted a certain group of people. And it was a negative one because it was one of not caring, of no responsibility. So it would attract irresponsible people, bullies, because you can make an argument that bullies are irresponsible because we have a responsibility to interact with each other in a way that leads to everyone's flourishing. And bullying someone stifles that flourishing. It does not promote it necessarily, at least not immediately. Because in my case, it certainly did end up to my flourishing. Because, as we mentioned before, I wouldn't be who I am today without that. So I'm very grateful for it. But kind of going back, so once I started caring about myself and putting in that responsibility to myself, it irradiated this aura, a more positive one, that attracted more positive, more responsible people. And that's the best way I can kind of wrap my head around finding the answer to your question there, if that's even a satisfactory answer.
What do you think would happen if you didn't make that connection? So if you didn't make the connection that you would have to take care of yourself in order to show the world that you were capable, how would you be today?
I don't know. I don't think I'd be talking to you, for starters. I don't know where I would be if I didn't make that connection. Because once again, that connection led me into dressing better, which led me into what has been, for the large part, my early kind of career. I mean, it's almost been a decade in menswear, all because of that decision I made and that realization and wanting to share that with other people. And, for not being educated and pretty much self-taught and self going through and kind of learning all this by myself, despite, just working in retail, although it's high-end retail, in all things considered, and only being 25, keep in mind, I'm just an absolute baby, especially if the average life expectancy is 80 years old. It means I've got 60 more years ahead of me. So it's like, I haven't even really started living yet, that I'm kind of learning and kind of stumbling this. And I feel like I've done pretty well for myself. Now, if I didn't do that, the only thing I can maybe see of, because keep in mind at all this stuff, like when I wasn't at school, I was pretty much at home playing video games. And then I just wake up early in the morning, get to school early in the morning and do my homework there. Like, I think I was getting to school at like 6, 7 o'clock in the morning when classes started at 9. And I just did all my homework in the morning so I could play video games with my friends when I got home, because that was kind of my little retreat from the world. So the only thing I could foresee, if I didn't do that, I would have still been in that negative circle and still been, and would have fallen more into that camp of that retreat that the video game addiction was essentially fulfilling for me, because that was kind of like a safe kind of environment where I didn't have to worry about anything, because, well, no one really, I mean, there's obviously like cyberbullying, so to speak, but you just, with the games I was playing, that wasn't really an element. You could just either play a game on your own, or you could play an online game and just mute all the chats. Like, you didn't really have to worry about it too much if it was really a bother to you, or at least with how I approached it. But so I would imagine I probably would have just went down a path where I would just be like the archetypical neck beard, Cheeto dust gamer in parents' basement kind of thing, right? I mean, I live at home with my parents and I'm in the basement, but instead of playing video games or whatnot, I do all the reading. I do Peterson Academy. I was actually, I was talking to my dad a little bit about it, because he's been on a very religious kind of searching trend right now. So I was like, hey, why don't we watch a lecture of Bishop Barron's together? And we watched that together last night. And that was a really kind of fun thing. And
did you like it?
I think it's because it's a little bit different, and this is kind of off topic a little bit, but when my girlfriend was in town before she went back home, we went just last Christmas. My mom sings in our church choir. She's done so for pretty much as long as I can remember. She wanted to go hear my mom sing, so we went to church. She's Muslim, so she's not Catholic. So we went to our church together, and for primary reason, because my girlfriend just wanted to hear my mom sing. And it was funny because my girlfriend likes singing, so she would sing along. But being Muslim, anytime any of the like religious songs we were singing had to mention anything about Jesus or like Jesus being divine, she wouldn't sing that line. It was so funny. It was so funny. Oh, geez, I love her so much. But what I noticed there, and this is in stark contrast to Bishop Robert Barron, was that because at this point, like, I used to be pretty atheistic, but now I'm a very deeply religious person, although I don't really subscribe to any kind of main categorical religion thing. I just go on this kind of personal exploration of being. So I was kind of very curious now that I have this new mindset that's a lot more open to myth and to the religious world. I was actually really curious to hear what the priest's kind of sermon or lecture would be, because now I feel like I'm in a place where I can actually understand it. But to my disappointment, the priest pretty much just gave a historical lesson about the historical, empirical, real life facts about, the nativity, the birth of Christ. And I was like, well, I wanted the myth. I wanted this. And that's what I love about Bishop Barron, is as much as he knows the history and all these contemporary thinkers at the time about the Bible, like Aquinas, Augustine, and he very much knows the historical world that the Bible is grounded in, but he also has respect for the myth, and he has no qualms about diving into the more philosophical, spiritual aspect of that. So I was kind of talking with my dad about that, and I was like, well, why don't we just watch his lecture and you can see what I mean for yourself, because I'm not doing him any justice. And so it was very different, and I noticed kind of going through it that it's like my dad actually quite liked the lecture, because we just listened to the very first episode where he was kind of encapsulating God as being itself and describing what God as an entity is, because most people get that kind of wrong and they think he's like some old man in the sky. And because you can't find an old man in the sky, he's not real. But that's not what he is, because he describes it more in that kind of relationship of an author to a book. Like Tolkien does not exist to Aragorn, but Aragorn is a real, in the Lord of the Rings, he's very real, but he can never know Tolkien, but Tolkien knows him. So he kind of explains in that dynamic, which I thought was brilliant. But all this is to say, my dad liked it, but I think it was kind of on that proximal edge for him, where it was, because Barron is almost a little more kind of technical, like Peterson is at times. And especially like, even sometimes I'll have to pause the lecture and look up certain words Barron says to know what they mean, because I just haven't heard them before, because he's got a very rich vocabulary. So I think there was an element of that maybe made it a little bit unapproachable to him, but still overall, he really quite enjoyed it. And I also kind of enjoyed it. Like, I never thought in a million years I'd be listening to a biblical lecture with my dad together in the basement on the big screen, right? It was just, it was kind of neat on its own respect there. I don't know if that answers your question, but
I think it's really cool that you are in your personal journey, and especially that you can share it with, in this case, your father, to watch well, what's pretty much boils down to, I think, a biblical series full with mythological narratives. That's really, I can imagine that's really fun and really meaningful at the same time.
Like right now, my dad was kind of exploring a lot about, the structure of the different angels in the Bibles and all that stuff, and the hierarchy and whatnot, because he really kind of wants to educate himself better on this. I'm like, this is a good opportunity. Why don't we see what you think of this? So, yeah.
I've a question for you regarding this.
Yeah.
So this is more on a global scale. Not about the personal journey per se. But do you think that we've moved away from mythological narratives in the modern world?
Yes, and to our detriment. So, fun thing about myth comes from the Greek word mythos, which was the Greek word for plot. So myth means plot. It means a series of interrelated events. That's what myth is. It's not like fairy tale and superstition. That's not what myth is. It's plot. So you could call the Bible a myth, let's say, because the Bible has a plot that you kind of follow. It's a series of all these interrelated events that tell this broader narrative. So yeah, I definitely think we moved away from myth, much to the fact that, because it's not a physical, tangible thing, myths are psychic realities. They're not physical realities. But I feel like, especially in Western culture now, we have completely disregarded them because we don't place any value on, if it's not a physical reality, if it's not a tangible physical thing, then it's irrelevant. And if you can't prove it physically, tangibly, then it's completely irrelevant. But
yeah, that's pretty much what I believe Dr. Dawkins brings forward quite a lot, with questions like, did it really happen? Questions like that.
And it's like, and then Peterson's response is that it's hyper real. It's like, it doesn't matter if it physically happened, because psychically it's like, there's something very real implicit in that structure that we don't quite understand how to articulate, but it's very real and it's there, but it's just ineffable.
Well, I do agree. It symbolizes a pattern of humanity. And so one of the comments that Dr. Dawkins made was that Peterson was drunk on symbolism, and that he made, I don't know what the number was, but something like 350 references to the story of Cain.
Which, by the way, what a scientific way to read a book and count all the different instances of Cain. Because I can imagine Dawkins read the book cover to cover and then read it again, highlighting every single time Peterson said Cain, right? So it just shows you how his mind works, right? And it's in this very analytical, kind of empirical modality. But to go to that point, and sorry, I kind of interrupted you a little bit, but
no worries, go ahead.
That thing, drunk on symbols, well, think back to what I described to you about dreams. Well, are dreams real? You can't, consciousness in that, it's not a physical thing, but if you can see about my story, because I meaningfully engaged with this non-real, nonsensical fairy tale, the effects that it had on my life, right? So like, what exactly, like, so it's like, did a bear actually chase me in the night and devour me? No, but is it irrelevant because it didn't physically happen?
Do you want my answer to that question?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
I would say yes, it is real. And the argument I would make here is the fact that you experience it means it is real to you. So to some degree, it is real because else you wouldn't have experienced that. So the question if it's physically real or did it happen in a timeline that's objectively perceivable by multiple people, to me is irrelevant. The fact that
Yeah,
it's the same. It's the same with emotion. Um, you might be well. Let's not take you an example, but a person might be triggered by something, might be angry
mm,
by something. Then you could ask yourself the question, well, was there a good reason for the person to be angry, or is it real? Is the thing that made her or him angry, is that real? Well, yes, to some degree, because it invoked that experience, it invoked that emotion. So on some degree it is real. Maybe not physically, maybe it's not factually there and perceivable by multiple people, but it is real in the sense of it's being
mm,
experienced by a human who's describing it like this. And the same story, to bring it back to Cain, I agree with the idea that it's hyper real. You know, there is a thing called resentment, and a lot of
mm.
people are being driven by resentment, and that resentment drives them to either the destroying the idea that people can be more successful than them and just bringing it down to, you know, things like abuse and power and manipulation that brought them there, instead of actual competency or actual, you know, value that they provide to society. You know, that resentment, it does exist, and that
Mhm.
is what that story symbolizes. So who cares if those brothers factually existed? It doesn't
Yeah,
matter.
yeah.
It
It's
symbolizes a human
mm,
pattern
mm.
over time that doesn't stop. It will probably 5,000 years from now, assuming that humans make it that far, this story will very likely still be true because resentment
Mm.
will still exist.
And that kind of goes back to that Greek definition of mythos, of myth as, plot, a series of interrelated events. It doesn't matter that whether or not Cain or Abel like physically happened and they were biological, like real brothers that we could dig up the bones of. That's irrelevant
Right.
because what matters is it's portraying a series of interrelated events that continually happen throughout the course of being. And it's to understand that is a very kind of real thing. Like I said, it's a psychic fact. It's like if we approached religion and myth in the way of dream, of understanding that overarching, the broader narrative structure and the message it conveys, like that's to me the point of these books. And the reason why there's so many different religions, it's like there's so many different like so here's an interesting thing that I think will kind of add to this conversation is I view religions like languages. So just like you can say bonjour, privyet, see konnichiwa, whatever, all these different words, they like hello, like they all mean the same thing, but they're expressed different ways. So all these different religions to me are different non-verbal, like implicit symbolic languages from, the more unconscious side. Because if language is the tool of consciousness, then symbols are the tools or the language of the unconscious. And that goes to the dream theories of kind of Carl Jung that, there's all these different languages and some things are expressed in better in different languages than they are in other languages. Like, for example,
Hmm.
myth and mythos. Mythos in the Greek meaning plot is a lot more accessible and approachable than, the English myth that we have kind of put in the realm of superstition when that's not what that really means. But it's like not as an effective way of interpreting that. Or like what's really, really beautiful is the Chinese word for nature. It's, I'm probably going to butcher the pronunciation, but it's Zitran. And what that means, and this is something I learned from Alan Watts, is that Zitran means of itself so. And this goes back to kind of Barron's lecture. He says God is, I think it's ipsum esse. It is to be itself. It's being itself. So what is
Hmm.
natural is, bees itself. And like, if you were to think of the word nature in the English sense, you'd think, oh, just like wilderness outside. But there's something more beautiful in that Chinese phrase, right? That is articulated better than it is in English. But
Hmm.
that doesn't mean that the English word isn't valuable. So all these different texts, they all have these different permutations and combinations of all these stories expressed in certain ways. And someone might understand how the Bible says something better than the Quran, or how the Tao Te Ching says something better than the Quran, but all of them have something very real that they're trying to articulate. Because I kind of my religious is kind of a personal thing in this idea of this perennial, this universal framework that I'm kind of describing to you. And it's something I described to because something about that kind of feels true, because a lot of these broader religious narratives have all these same themes in them, despite being separated by time and distance and all these different kind of epochs, right? So to deny something like that as being completely trivial and not helpful, I just don't really like that idea, because of this essence of like, well, it's real because, the Bible, like all these things are here. People thought them up for reasons. And just because we don't know that reason doesn't mean they're invalid, right? Like the fact that we can even talk about myth means that there's something real about it.
Yes.
As far as I see it.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense on that long ramble.
It certainly does. So when I asked you the question, if you think we moved away from mythological narratives in the modern world, you answered yes. What do you think we've lost by doing this?
Meaning. I think we've lost meaning, and that's why that's what John Vervaeke kind of puts forth as the meaning crisis, in my opinion, is that we've lost kind of the ethic of what these books tell you, like going for the example of Cain. The hyper-real message is a story of the pitfalls of resentment. And those things kind of echo throughout the book. So it tells you like, hey, here's a message about resentment. Like I was just reading the book of Job, for example, or Job, however you want to pronounce it. I think the proper pronunciation is, in Hebrew, it's Yob. But you can see how even in that story, Job wrestles with resentment because of all the calamities that's happening to him. But what he doesn't see on the backside is that, God and Satan are kind of conspiring against him and pulling these things to see if he will remain true to his faith. So he can extract a meaning out of that like, hey, when you're confronted with resentment, it's because you're being tested to not be resentful. So don't give into that. All these bad things are happening to you because the divine powers that be are trying to test your resolve and make sure that, you don't succumb to these things and you don't submit to the temptations. And there's something valuable in the meaning of that. But in this kind of more scientific way that we're going for, that actually kind of ties into, the Master and his Emissary and Ian McGilchrist's work, is that we're in this explicit empirical trap of the left hemisphere of the brain. And to give it its credit, it's like, well, the fact that you and I, me in Canada, you in the Netherlands, can even have a conversation is the fruits of that scientific empirical labors, right? So like, why wouldn't you value it as the highest possible thing? Because like all the stuff we're talking on was like just like metal and bits of the earth that we dug out, refined, soldered together, and summary of how we can connect to a satellite in space through invisible waves. Like there's something very alluring and tempting about that it's like,
magic.
Well, why worry about anything else other than this? Because it's so like, it's so impressive. But it's like, as much as it physically is real, if we don't know how to be, if we don't know how to conduct ourselves, if we don't have a meaning behind all of it, then kind of anything goes. And that's not a good thing.
How do you think that impacts mental health and maybe communities in general? What do you think the impact of this is on a personal level? The loss of meaning.
Yeah. So personally, I think it's what we're seeing in society of people, the loss of like social unity and harmony. And this kind of goes into like a lot of my thoughts kind of go into depression on this. I'm going to talk about it kind of briefly, but it's very complex. I'm not really talking about clinical depression per se, but everyone in their common tongue, when they kind of feel in this really down, negative state, where in this nihilistic lack of meaning state, would just say like, oh, I'm depressed. That's kind of, that essence is what I'm talking about. And what's very interesting, if you look at depression, the term in the dictionary means a state of feeling despondent. And if you look up what despondent means a state of low spirits. In contrast, enthusiasm, because everyone so nowadays has centered their meaning almost around happiness and feeling positive and feeling pleasantry. But what they're really after is enthusiasm as happiness. And enthusiasm comes from a Greek word, enthusiasmos, which means to be possessed by the Spirit of God. So you can see how that contrasts in depression. So when you're depressed, when you're lack of meaning, you're devoid of spirit. You are not in connection with the Spirit of God. Where if you're enthusiastic, if you're happy, what we're all trying to strive towards, that is to be in unity with the Spirit of God. And actually in Barron's lecture, he actually touches on this, that like God created man to go forth and flourish, to, be enthusiastic, to be full and filled with kind of the Spirit. So the consequence of that, and this is why I think we're seeing that the astounding rise in depression across cultures, is because across cultures we've disregarded myth, and myth is what allows us to kind of connect and commune with the Spirit of God, which we've, in our kind of ignorance, have decided to just completely disregard because we've become so enamored by the mastery over the physical world that science has allowed us to attain. If that kind of makes sense.
I think you are also pointing a bit towards the God is dead concept that Nietzsche brought forward in his work,
and how that was actually a warning because of the things kind of that we've been talking about, that when God dies, so does kind of morality in a sense. So does this kind of universal uniting social harmony of man. Because now if there's no God, then, well, what's the transcendent factor? Is our purpose in life, is it just to feel good and amass things for ourselves? Or is it to go forth as an ethical being despite all that comes our way? And that what matters most as a human is not how much you amass and how much mastery you have over the physical world, but rather how much mastery you have over yourself, so you can go in negotiations and make sure that everyone flourishes and thrives, right? And then that is kind of our ethic, that regardless of what you do, and this kind of is to act in a proper ethic, into proper worship of, the divine factor and the service of that. And the way I kind of frame that is, and this kind of tails into my theory of that depression that I've been kind of working on, is with the deadly sins and the heavenly virtues. So sin, and this is something I got from Peterson that like just shattered me, was that sin comes from the Greek word harmatia, which means to miss one's target. It's an archery term in ancient Greece. So you can think of the 7 deadly sins as the 7 fundamental behaviors that cause us to lead our target. So greed, sloth, gluttony, wrath, pride, lust, all these things lead us astray from missing the mark. But in them, there's almost this kind of temptation for like a mastery of the physical world, right? Like greed, you want to amass all this stuff and keep it to yourself. It's a certain like collection of the physical world. Lust, desire, you desire and long for things in the physical world. Pride, you think you're entitled to the physical world. Just for a few examples, or gluttony, all this physical food I want to amass for myself. There's this kind of controlling ethic over the world, whereas you could look at the virtues in contrast to that as if sin is what makes you miss your target, then virtue, by way of opposite, like how a magnet has a north and south pole, the south pole of sin, let's say, is to hit your target. So these are the 7 fundamental behaviors that cause you to hit your target. And they are all, like humility. Don't know these off the top of my head anymore. It's been a while since I've actually really articulated this. Because one of the things I wanted to go to school for, kind of going back in our conversation, was to see if I could, through like behavioral psychology, prove this theory empirically. If you studied people who self-identify as depressed or depressed people and took a look at their behaviors and see, like, wouldn't it be interesting if they just so happened to coincide with, if their behaviors, like if someone depressed was being overly prideful, overly lustful, overly greedy, or anything in their lives.
Focusing on the 7 deadly sins.
Yeah. And to see if like, well, if you can empirically prove that, does that empirically improve religion in a sense? Because if depression is to be out of the Spirit of God, and that happens when you miss your target, and to be enthusiastic is to be filled with the Spirit of God, which happens when you hit your target. You can ally yourself with these forces, and that life is kind of a wrestling and a war between the control of sin and virtue in a sense, in terms of developing proper conduct. I'm going on a huge ramble here, but all this is to say is that, and this is something I noticed once I discovered this is at kind of the peak in my life. And this was kind of something I realized in COVID, because after I had laid off, I didn't know if I was working again. And I'm like, well, I staked my whole life on this job and now it's gone. When I got back, I'm like, when I heard that podcast, I was like, I'm going to try to implement and integrate these rules in my life and see what happens. Because, I'm very grateful to be back. And I noticed that the more I allied myself with, not necessarily that I was being virtuous, but the more that I resisted the temptation of sin to miss my target, the more I would advance and the more happy I would feel and the more enthusiastic I would feel. And the more that radiated outwards and lifted everyone else around me. And like I said, like, actually I didn't say this, but like for 20 some years, I was trying to get a girlfriend, never happened. I start following this principle. And then like that summer, I just get an intuition, go on a dating app. I go on my dating app, boom, first girlfriend I've been with is my current girlfriend, and we've been together for 3 years, and we plan on getting married and starting a family and all that. And that's what we're working for. And it's like almost like kind of like a divine providence, because I was adhering to these principles. And once again, it's not that I was being virtuous per se, but that I was abstaining from trying to miss my target over a prolonged period of time. And there's a lot of that, I think, reflected in the biblical narrative, although I'm not a biblical scholar, but that idea of going out into the desert and reintegrating yourself to come back to society, right? But I'm kind of going off on a little bit of a tangent. And so all that kind of goes back to your central question about kind of meaning in today's society, is that we're all trying to struggle for this, but we have confused that enthusiasm, that possession with the Spirit of God, for physical pleasure and the good positive feeling we get from that. And that's, to me at least, what seems to be what has ushered in this like hedonic age of this kind of nihilistic, no central ethic focus drive through a society where everyone's kind of doing whatever they want to feel good, right? To feel pleasure. I mean, it's very complicated, and I'm by no means like an expert in any of this, but this is just like, these thoughts come to me and I'm like, I don't know what to do with them other than maybe talk about them. Like, that's about the only thing I haven't done with these thoughts, is talk about them. So why not just start trying to articulate myself and learning how to be more articulate, so I can put these thoughts out in the world and see what becomes of it. Yeah. Because what the interesting thing too is, because my girlfriend, when I met her, her very first message to me, because in my like bio, I did like a 2 truths and a lie. And one of them was like, I wake up every day at 3 a.m. And she's like, there's no way you wake up at 3 a.m. Well, not that she was like that implicitly. What she explicitly said was like, oh, I've been wanting to, get up at like 6 a.m. and start my days earlier myself. Could you help teach me? And so I worked with her, and as much as she kind of struggled with, like at the time, she was struggling with this statistics course in university. She had failed it, I think like 3 or 4 times, and not because she's not smart. She is so intelligent. Like, she's probably one of the smartest people I've ever met. Like, she is wildly smart. But was because like sloth, she just wasn't contending with it. She wasn't actually putting in her effort. So when I kind of, not that I spelled out these principles that I was kind of working on, but that I helped kind of guide her towards that, the more she was not sinning, and the more she was not behaving in a way that would make her miss her target, and the more she was behaving in ways that would hit her target, well, she passed with like an A+ that year on this course that she had failed 3 times. And I'm like, this is like, magic. And
that's beautiful.
And it's like I feel like there's something there because I'm seeing it, but I also don't know how much of a degree is it like a self-fulfilling prophecy kind of thing, right? Like, if you go out wanting to see red cars, you'll just see a bunch of red cars on the road, right? where if you don't think about it, you don't see it, right? So, but that's why I wanted to go to school to prove it. And hopefully through Peterson Academy in learning the skills, and if it gets accredited or whatnot, but I can come into contact with people. And maybe while I don't know how to do the science myself, I can connect and network with people who do know, and to be more of like a, I guess like a director on a movie set, like, here's the idea, like go for it and see what you can find kind of thing. Cause I don't really need the credit to be the one who discovers this myself, but I have this innate curiosity to see like, well, what if it is true? Cause it certainly seems in what I've practiced in my life that it is true. And anytime where I've noticed kind of a downward end, if I pause and take a look at my behavior, I see that I'm more so missing my target, that my behaviors are more aligned with the 7 deadly sins than they are the 7 heavenly virtues. And I'm just going to finish up one thing here. Sorry, you got me going, and I'm bad for that. Once I get going, because I don't get to talk about this stuff ever, I just go.
I love your enthusiasm.
Oops. I'm a little whirling bit of chaos, but and so what I've noticed is that when I'm in the downward end, that my behaviors align with that. And there's something neat about that common experience of depression where people just feel grounded, like they can't move and they don't want to get out of bed and they don't want to do anything. Because, well, think about it this way, in terms of like a philosophical, like metaphysic round, if you're conducting yourself in a way that is harmful to you, that is causing you to miss your target, and if there's a loving creator God looking over you who wants you to succeed, well, would he let you keep going down that path? Or would he try to impose something on you for you to stop and kind of take stock? Like, it was a brilliant insight by Jim Carrey of all people, where he said, depression is deep rest. Your body is calling you for a deep rest. And what that deep rest is in line with this theory, and I think it's true because it kind of follows the logic and connects, is that when you're in that state of deep rest, it's forcing you, all you're left is with your internal self, because you're shutting down from the external world. You're like, I don't want to get out of bed. I don't want to do anything. I'm just stuck here. It's because it wants you to confront and contend with your behavior. And it's like kind of a signal, like, look into yourself. You're missing your target. This is not your path. You're going astray. Please come back to your path. Please get on there. And I've noticed in myself, when I feel like that, if I'm able to muster up the courage to be 100% honest with myself and accept the own painful error of my ways, then I am freed from that state and I'm able to go forth into the world. And it's like, I don't know what to do with that, but it's like, it's a cool observation I've met that seems to
you're able to zoom out and look at patterns of behavior and patterns of experience, and then analyze those and see what you can do with them. So you're not stuck in the experience per se. You're able to take a step back and just look at the pattern
and kind of capture the essence. And this is actually something Bishop Barron mentions in his lecture, is the difference between experience and essence. And to kind of relate it back to Dawkins, Dawkins wants a proof of a physical experience, but Peterson is advocating in the Bible of the psychic essence. And I think that's a good way to kind of frame.
Well, the truth is in the middle, I think. So I'm not going to use the word compromise, because
that's a naughty word around these parts. We don't like it.
That's the naughty word. But they both serve a purpose. There's factuality and there's human experience, and being able to recognize them both, zooming out, think about them, and think about what the best next step is I think very important. Whether it's pattern recognition, doing the same thing over and over again and not realizing it, but it brings you to, it puts you in not desirable situations, or whether it's something else. Being able to take a step back, take stock, as you said, and then move forward. That is a good thing.
Depression kind of forces you to disintegrate so we can reintegrate with the proper ethic and kind of separate the wheat from the chaff, right? And then to go forward, so you're on path, you're going to hit your target, right? You're kind of doing what God wants you to do. You're fulfilling his purpose for you.
I like the way you described it earlier, and I haven't thought about this. yet. So if you would have asked me what depression is before we have had this conversation, I will give you the clinical definition. So what is technically part of depression? What I really like, and this actually makes a lot of sense, and I'm not sure if it's really true in all situations, but so far I can't think of a single reason why it is not true, is that depression causes you to not have the spirit of enthusiasm and not have the spirit of, I would use the word driving force myself. There's nothing driving you towards a goal.
It's a loss of spirit.
Yeah, that's a very interesting way of looking at it. Yeah.
And that's kind of why at the start I made the differentiation between clinical depression, right? Because as we were kind of mentioning just there, how there's a distinction between, it's kind of somewhere in the middle, not to use the naughty word, but between science and religion, like they're both valid. And as much as there is a clinical depression, I think there is very much a spiritual depression, and we just might not have a word for that yet. So we're using the same term because it feels like this, but it's this thing, and we just haven't found a way to articulate it properly yet. But because I think the vast majority of people who would say they're kind of depressed, just in common, like if you were to go up anyone on the street, they would think more of this than they would this, because I bet you a lot of people haven't necessarily been clinically diagnosed. Like I know I haven't been clinically diagnosed, but I can certainly attest and reflect back on periods of my life where I have no other word but to say that I was in a depression. I felt depressed. But I've never been, like, I don't know if that's true clinically, scientifically, but I know spiritually is very much the case.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's a very good place to wrap it up for now.
Yeah, I was just going to say, just kind of know we're kind of almost at the 3-hour mark here. Like, we just kind of went going, but that means we're in that spirit of play, right?
Yeah, for sure. I really enjoyed
start another conversation.
Yeah, there's a lot to go forward on, because for example, the whole conversation that one of the topics that we prepared to have during this conversation was, for example, Nietzsche and his Übermensch concept, depression in general. There's a lot to delve there. I'm also interested in some more discussion on the biblical stories about modern men and about the works of people like Nietzsche and Jung. So let's for sure keep that for next time.
Yes, absolutely.
Let's make a nice follow-up. That sounds very good. Let's take stock of what we did today so we can find the appropriate step forward. But so far it was, I really enjoyed this conversation, Wyatt. Thanks for coming online. I really appreciate also your insights on all kinds of different subjects. It was really nice to have.
Yeah, well, and thank you for being such a great host. Actually, I noticed I get a lot of, social anxiety or whatnot, but like, it's just new things. What is the line between being nervous and being excited? Because being excited feels just like being nervous, and being nervous feels just like being excited, right? But like, there's a certain giddy kind of feeling about coming on that I was kind of nervous about, kind of tight, kind of apprehensive. I've never done something like this, much less have I actually talked about all the stuff we talked about with anyone really outside of like my girlfriend. But even still, sometimes, I remember one time I was telling her my theory and she just went to sleep. But not in a disrespectful way, but you were just kind of in this lull kind of state. It was a long day. She was tired. Anywho, but you have made me feel like being here. I felt completely at ease. It feels natural, like talking to a good friend. Like, it's been stellar. So kudos to you as a host, because you're doing a great job of making this feel like inviting and welcome. And I doubt that's unique just to me. I imagine many of the other guests will probably testify to the same sentiment.
Well, I really appreciate you saying that, and to me it also felt quite natural. So it was really fun delving into all the subjects with you, and for sure, let's do that. Let's do that again.
Yes.
Really excited for that. 100%.
Yeah, you just let me know when works for you. I can be pretty flexible, especially while my girlfriend's away, because I've got nothing but myself to kind of wrestle with. So
we will collaborate on the next moment instead of finding a compromise.
Yes, sir.
Beautiful. Thanks so much, Wyatt.
No, thank you very much, Jeffrey. Yeah, have a great day, and we'll talk again soon.
Yeah, we'll stay in touch. Take care.
Yeah. Cheers.
Bye. And with that, Wyatt has left the conversation. It's been great hearing his thoughts on resilience, the search for meaning, and his journey of self-discovery. And conversations like this really remind me that we all have our own stories to tell and are seeking the threads of meaning that help us move forward. Thank you so much for listening to the Jeffrey van Leeuwen podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing or following the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Your support is always greatly appreciated. Thanks again. And as always, take care.